The Senate. But we're happy you're here with us, and certainly I'd like to, is that true?
That is my...
Yeah, so that's, but as far as we were concerned, we're going to have you up here on the dais with us, so you can certainly continue your orientation, what I understand you did today, earlier today. Do you have anything you'd like to say on your behalf?
Before you're sentenced.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to participating, and it's an honor to be appointed to serve on this Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. I look forward to helping to implement and help our state as far as higher education is concerned. It's a very vital part of our state economy and the growth of the future of this state, so I look forward to serving. Thank you.
Thank you. And good luck with your confirmation by the Senate. It's usually painless. The first agenda item is approval of our January 21 Agency Operation Committee minutes. Do I hear a motion by Mr. Steen, a second by the Ambassador Cumber. Are there any other questions on that? Okay, we'll take a motion to approve. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. It is adopted. Next item is public testimony. We have not received anyone registered for public testimony, so we'll move on. I'm going to recognize Linda Battles, who is the Deputy Commissioner for Agency Operations and Communications, as well as the Chief Operating Officer, who will be giving the board an update on the LAR, which is our legislation appropriations requests. Both in the House and the Senate versions of the General Appropriation Act. This does not require any action, and I believe you have a handout for us here. Is that true?
Yes, actually I have two handouts. One is a copy of my slides that I will be going through today, and there's another handout that's a spreadsheet. And this spreadsheet is a summary. It's basically lists all of our budget strategies broken down by goal. You'll notice that we removed the strategy number because in the House and Senate bills there are some new budget strategies that have been added to our bill pattern that weren't included in the House bill, so it changes the numbering system. So we didn't want to add confusion to the spreadsheets, so they are broken down by goal. And then you'll see our 2016-17 adjusted base, which is essentially equivalent to level funding from the current biennium with some adjustments. You'll see the next column is our exceptional item request for the particular budget strategy. And then you'll see the total of the adjusted base plus our exceptional item, and that third column represents our total legislative appropriations request in all funds. And so that totals about, it was level funding at $1.4 billion plus an additional $300 million in a total of 24 exceptional items. Then you see the Senate bill. The Senate did adopt, the full Senate did adopt its version of the appropriations bill, House Bill 1, and these are the figures that are represented for the coordinating board's budget. And then you see the House version. So this is just for your quick reference and so that you have the full picture, and then I'll go into a lot more detail in my presentation.
So a question on where it says Senate, it actually says Senate HB2.
Oh, that's wrong. It should be HB1. Sorry.
HB1.
Yes.
Okay. So this is the Senate taking up HB1.
Correct.
And then what will happen? They'll have to have a conference committee to work these out?
Yes.
Okay.
And I'll talk a little more detail about the next steps.
Okay. The floor is yours.
Great. I do want to take the liberty to take a little extra time in my presentation since we have Dr. Farias here, and this is his first meeting of the board. I'd like to provide some background information on our budget items so that he knows exactly what we're talking about. Okay, first slide. This is a table from the Legislative Budget Board summary of the House version of House Bill 1. And you see the board's overall appropriations broken down by the four methods of finance. As you can see, the House bill appropriates a total of $1.5 billion in all funds for the 2016-17 biennium, which represents an increase of $36.9 million, or a 2.4% increase over the current biennium. You'll see some reductions in general revenue dedicated funds, which are primarily due to reductions to the tuition set-asides that support the Texas Beyond Time program. This program was established in 2003, and it's a zero-interest loan program for eligible students earning a baccalaureate degree at public and private universities. The loan is forgiven if the student graduates. If they're getting a four-year degree, if they graduate within that 4 years with a B average. It's been funded through a combination of tuition set-asides that are collected from the Texas public universities as well as general revenue. The House bill phases out the Beyond Time program funding to support renewal students only at both public and private institutions. So that's why you see a decrease in GRD. The reductions to the other funds line, the 31.5%, is primarily due to anticipated decreases in donations for the Texas Grant Program, which we received this biennium from the Texas Guaranteed Student Loan Corporation. And we don't anticipate those contributions in the next biennium. This LBB table is the summary of the Senate version of House Bill 1. You'll see here that we have a 9.3% increase in all funds as opposed to the 2.4% increase in the House. That's primarily due to the significant increase that the Senate made in graduate medical education and the Texas Grants Program, which I'll go into more detail in the next couple of slides. Instead of a reduction in general revenue dedicated funds like the House, we see an increase. And this is primarily because the Beyond Time program and the appropriation of the tuition set-asides is retained in the Senate bill. That will allow the public universities to continue to issue new and renewal loans. But like the House bill, it does phase out the program for the private institutions. This table provides a comparison of the House and Senate funding increases for our four major state financial aid programs. As a reminder, Texas Grants and Texas Educational Opportunity Grants were number 1 and number 2 in terms of our highest priorities out of our 24 exceptional items. Texas College Work Study was number 10, and Tuition Equalization Grants was number 15. First, with Texas Grants. This program provides grants to financially needy students who enroll at Texas public universities. The program prioritizes initial awards for students who have completed at least 2 out of 4 academic criteria in high school. The current average award is $5,000 per year. Our exceptional item request was an increase of $137.9 million, which would have served 100% of all new and renewal students at a higher average award amount of $5,300. With the increase of $37.3 million in the House bill, we estimate that this will provide an average award amount of $5,000 and serve approximately 94% of all eligible students in FY16 and 79% of students in FY17. With the Senate's increase of $83.5 million, we estimate serving 98% of students in FY16 and 86% of students in FY17, but at the $5,000 award amount. The Texas Educational Opportunity Grants, or TEOG, provides grants to financially needy students who enroll at Texas public community, technical, and state colleges. Our exceptional item request was for an increase of $37.3 million. You'll recall that last session, our Sunset Bill removed these colleges from participation in the Texas Grant Program and made the Texas Grant Program a university-only program. Along with that was a transfer of $37.3 million from Texas Grants to TEOG in order to keep funding for the sector whole, as if, because they are no longer participating in Texas Grants. You'll recall that we had a negotiated rulemaking committee that was not successful in reaching unanimous consensus on the allocation methodology because of the way that the formula distributed the funds. It disproportionately hurt the technical and state colleges under that formula, and they could not reach unanimous consensus. Subsequently, the coordinating board staff recommended to you a methodology that created a hold harmless, and you adopted that earlier this year. During the session, I've been working with representatives from these colleges and Representative Howard and her staff, and they have proposed a couple of legislative remedies. The first is in House Bill 1 of the House version. There is a separation of the TEOG budget strategy into two separate budget strategies, one dedicated for the community colleges and then the other pot of money dedicated to the technical and state colleges. The way that the funds were split into those two separate budget strategies is based on a 92%, 8% split, with 92% of the funds going to community colleges and the 8% going to technical and state colleges. This funding split was based on previous year's allocations, so it's proportional to what the institutions had received. If this budget strategy separation ultimately passes in the final appropriations bill, what we anticipate doing is calling a negotiated rulemaking committee for each of those budget strategies, one just with the community colleges and one just with the technical and state colleges, to come up with their own allocation methodologies. We'll have to do that on an emergency rulemaking basis, so we'll have to start very quickly after the budget is passed by the legislature. We'll then ask the board to meet in a special called board meeting upon adjournment of your board committee meetings in June. And that should take about 5 minutes, so it won't take up too much of your time, but we do need the board to adopt those in order for them to go into effect, and they do have a short-term effect, but it'll give us enough time to allocate the FY16 dollars back to the institutions. And then we'll go through the regular process for final adoption. So I'm very pleased that we've reached that consensus. All of the representatives on those from Texas Association of Community Colleges, state colleges, and technical colleges are in agreement with the approach.
And that's what I'm trying to get to. And maybe I'm missing something a little bit, Linda, but so Representative Howard's proposal that's in the bill, you said 92% for community colleges, 8% for the technicals, right?
And the state colleges.
And the state colleges. So, but it seems like that's already agreed upon. So then we still need, is it just to adopt that, or what's the next gyration we've got to go to if that's the way it's written?
You'll recall that Senate Bill 215, our sunset bill, required us to engage in negotiated rulemaking for the allocation methodologies.
Right.
And so I believe the desire is for these institutions to come up with their own allocation methodology. So I would assume that the TSDCs and the Lamars would want to base their allocation methodology on tuition and fees. And then the community colleges would want to base their allocation on enrollments and other factors. So I think we would probably have an agreement on those two separate methodologies, and that's why we have to go through emergency rulemaking so that we get the board to adopt those rules so we can get the money out in FY16.
But, so we think there's a high probability that they'll come to an agreement.
I'm 99.9% sure that they will unanimously agree to an allocation methodology.
And then ours will just be, to your point, a quick acceptance of what they've come up with.
That's right. Okay. That's right.
Well, it would be an approval.
Right, an approval.
We can't deem them status to approve their rule, they can recommend the rule. But really, the two camps pretty much were unanimous in their two philosophies. So I can't imagine this thing not being rapidly adopted.
That's what I'm hoping.
With what they were advocating for before. Well, at least that's what I'm hearing from staff.
That's right.
Okay.
And they have to have this done for the fall semester?
That's correct.
So that's the
we're-
reason it's, okay.
Yes.
So I had talked to you about the timing of that emergency board meeting. Are we going to try to put it between the two committee meetings?
Yes, so that we can have the majority of the board members available. I did remember you just said that. But yes, we will do it upon adjournment of the CAP
Right.
prior to the beginning of the cause.
So that we'll have the maximum number of board members present. Good.
Thank you. Moving on to the tuition equalization grants, or TEG. This provides grants to financially needy students who enroll at Texas independent institutions of higher education. Our exceptional item request was for an $18 million increase at the House funding level of $12.2 million increase. We will serve approximately 29,500 students per year, and at the Senate level, we'll serve about 30,300 students per year. The average award in both scenarios would be $3,250. The Texas College Work Study program allows students to earn money to pay part of their educational expenses in higher education. The House version provides no increase, but includes our exceptional item request of a $5.3 million increase in Article 11. Article 11 is known as the wish list, which allows unfunded budget items to remain on the table for consideration by the conference committee. If they choose to pull in one of those items into the budget, then that is eligible. However, these items in Article 11 are very unlikely to reach the final budget. The Senate's $2.5 million increase will serve an additional 2,000 students annually for a total of 7,000 students and at an average award amount of $1,365. On this slide, we see Advise Texas. This program places 120 recent university graduates on high school campuses across the state to serve as near-peer college advisors. They essentially supplement the work of high school counselors by providing information to students about going to college to earn a workforce certificate, an associate's degree, or a bachelor's degree. They also provide information about the various high school graduation pathways that have been mandated by House Bill 5, and they provide information about financial aid should they pursue higher education. They even provide information about military options. This program has previously been funded through federal grant funds, which have now gone away. Our exceptional item was $8 million in order to continue funding our existing 120 advisors that we have working across the state. On the House side, we did not get funding for Texas Grant other than a rider in Article 11. But on the Senate side, we were successful in getting $4 million adopted into the budget in Article 3, and the remaining $4 million was adopted in Article 11. We anticipate that the $4 million will support half of the advisors that we currently have. The next one is the Texas Research Incentive Incentive Program, or TRIP, which provides state matching funds that are awarded to the 8 emerging research universities based on how much an institution raises in private grants and endowments to enhance their research activity. The goal is to help these universities move toward national research university status. And for Dr. Farias, the 8 emerging research universities are Texas State University, Texas Tech, University of North Texas, University of Houston, UT Arlington, UT Dallas, UT El Paso, and UT San Antonio. And of course, the 2 national research universities are UT and A&M. As of April 20th, the current unfunded TRIP match was $149.8 million. Both the House and Senate appropriations will cover only a portion of that current backlog and will not fund any of the matching requests between now and the end of the next biennium. The House does have a rider in Article 9 that appropriates an additional $67.5 million contingent on legislation abolishing the Emerging Technology Fund. Moving on to graduate medical education expansion. Last session, the legislature created and funded several new programs to directly and indirectly expand the number of GME residency slots in Texas. The overall goal is to achieve a 1.1 to 1 ratio of Texas first-year entering positions and medical school graduates. Our exceptional item request was for an increase of $40 million. The House increased GME by $14.4 million and added $10 million for GME formula funding to the coordinating board's budget for distribution to the health-related institutions in order for them to increase the number of resident slots as well as for faculty costs related to GME. The Senate increased GME by $26.8 million and adopted our exceptional item request of an additional $16 million for the Family Practice Residency Program. And this program provides funding for family practice residents who serve in underserved areas of the state. The Senate also appropriates $3 million to reestablish the preceptorship program, which has been unfunded since 2011. This program provides stipends to Texas medical students who complete a month-long experience. This is typically during the summer between their first and second year of medical school, and they essentially work with a family physician or pediatrician and so forth. And the overall goal is to encourage medical students to choose primary care careers by providing early exposure to primary care medical specialty. And the Senate also provides a $2 million increase for the Joint Admissions Medical Program. JAMP encourages economically disadvantaged students to pursue a medical education. The additional funds in the Senate will increase the current stipend of $3,500 per medical school student to approximately $6,500. And there are currently 672 students participating in the program. The House adopted our Regional Pathways Project exceptional item request of $274,000 in Article 3, but the Senate adopted this amount in Article 11. The Pathways Project supports local partnerships between independent school districts and the local institutions of higher education to work with the coordinating board to collect and analyze data that identifies specific strengths and weaknesses of students' academic preparation and ultimate achievement in higher education. We've established 5 partnerships across the state that have proven effective in helping those ISDs and institutions of higher education with aligning public and higher education. The additional funding in the House bill will support the creation of 5 additional partnerships. The Doctoral Incentive Repayment Program provides up to $20,000 per year in student loan repayments for up to 5 years to provide incentives to individuals who come from disadvantaged and underrepresented backgrounds to serve as full-time faculty and administrators at our Texas institutions of higher education. This is a recommendation that you'll recall when we were contemplating the legislative appropriations request in July of last year, that members of the Texas Association of Chicanos in Higher Education came and asked that you add this as an exceptional item, and we did. The Senate adopted our request of $700,000 in the budget in Article 3, but the House adopted this amount in Article 11. And finally, on this slide, the Educational Aid Tuition Exemption Program was created in 1997 and has been unfunded since 2011. It provides tuition exemptions for eligible educational aides who enroll in college to become certified teachers. The House appropriates $1.5 million for the program and requires the coordinating board to prioritize the distribution of funds to institutions that provide a match of at least 10% for each exemption awarded. It also requires the coordinating board to seek additional funding from the U.S. Department of Education and private foundations. The Senate adopted this amount in Article 11. You'll recall that we highly prioritized our IT funding needs because we have not had a capital budget for 4 years, and I'm very pleased to report that both the House and Senate adopted funding in Article 3 and in Article 9 for our IT equipment replacements, security upgrades, and funding to support the implementation of CAPS, which stands for the Centralized Accounting, Payroll, and Personnel System, which is being led by the Comptroller's Office. So we're very pleased about that. Here you'll see our
Linda,
remaining...
can I ask a question on this, on
Yes.
that previous slide? What does DCS infrastructure mean?
That is the upgrades that are needed at the data consolidation services. So it's off-site. And then we had two separate exceptional items, one for the coordinating board upgrades here at the agency and the other for the DCS off-site. And it was interesting, the House funded the coordinating board, but the Senate funded the DCS. So they're going to have to reconcile that. And I don't know if
So
it's clear.
was our ask for 390 and 385, so we could do both?
They were our original requests for the security upgrades at the agency was $390,000, and the upgrades to the agency's DCS IT infrastructure was $550,000.
Okay.
And Sid is our Assistant Commissioner for Information Solutions and Services, if you have any specific questions.
And just to refresh my memory, what was our request for the equipment replacements? We got a big disparity there between the two also.
That was $490,000.
Oh, the House gave the full.
That's correct. The Senate had a specific IT work group evaluating these requests from all the state agencies. So they had a method for how they were evaluating similar requests. And Sid and I were in one of the work group meetings where the Senator West, who headed up that work group, really felt like some of the agencies were expending too much funds on fancy equipment, and that they should look to surplus to refurbish some of those equipment. I don't know if you have any comments.
No comments I'd
Okay.
like to make public.
It's just that there's still a pretty big gap of what we had decided that we needed and that we all talked about and tried to make a really compelling case. And there's still going to be a gap. So what's that? I mean, if we get somewhere way south, how do we
What's the plan?
utilize that to the best, most efficient way?
And I certainly appreciate the presentation you made to the House Subcommittee, but as I mentioned to somebody in the room here, anything we get is a lot better than what we've had the last 4 years, and we'll live with it. I think 490, 252, either one of those I think we can live with. So we'll get by.
Okay. Thanks, Sid.
Linda, wasn't there some other study that the legislature did on these IT costs also that where they came up with some costs that were different than ours, or no?
Is that the per unit cost?
Well, there was.
I thought they had done some analysis of their own, or
Well, I don't recall that. I do recall in one of the work group meetings that they had different figures for the unit costs
okay.
that were different from our estimates. We had actually lower estimates than what they had said we had.
Okay.
So I don't know if that's, but maybe you're talking about the Gartner assessment on our security upgrades, or?
I don't recall.
Okay.
I could be.
So the question is the state planning on having some type of a centralized IT services that all the agencies could utilize that would consolidate to make it more efficient?
Yes.
Is that what they're planning on doing?
I think what they're planning on doing is having all IT replacement, acquisitions, refresh, go through DIR.
So
hopefully
they
get a
would be
better
able to-
price.
Volume purchasing?
Exactly.
Okay,
Yeah.
and then they would standardize the systems in that regard?
Presumably.
Yeah.
depending on the category of user, with hot power users or casual users.
So if there were economies of scale, there could be lowered costs, and each agency saying, for me to do this all by myself, it's going to cost this. But if you've got a dozen agencies doing it, it maybe is 10 or 20% less than the total.
That's what the objective is, yes.
Okay.
One other question, Chairman.
Please.
On the CAPS implementation, I mean, we've got, once again, a pretty big disparity between the House and the Senate. It just seems to me that would, with all the agencies, I mean, everyone's going through this. I mean, there's got to be a set number that a real, more tangible number that this is what it'll cost to do this. So how do we reconcile that disparity?
Well, if you recall, our exceptional item was for $2.7 million.
Oh.
So either one of these figures is considerably below that. And the working group that Linda and I attended, it was interesting because several agencies have come forward with exceptional items for CAPS, and Senator West just said cut them all in half across the board.
Yeah.
So we didn't get a chance to make our case.
Just puzzled how I guess we're going to have to make up the difference internally. Because we have to do this, right?
What this funding does is because we're going to have to pull 8 FTE per year of implementation to focus on this, and they're essential staff. Ken Martin's one of them, Sid and some of his staff are, our HR director and others. And so what the funding does is help us support the backfill and hire temporary employees that would help continue our daily workloads. And so I do see this, the comptroller's office is taking the lead on this, and they have independent consultants that are helping them coordinate all of this with I think there's 18 agencies that are in this phase that are going to be implementing this. And they actually got a significant amount of support from the legislature, I believe in the amount of a little over
$30-something million?
$30 million to do this. So when we were asked to put together our estimates of how much this would cost us, that's exactly how we took into account the amount of FTEs that it would require, and then we looked at the state classification to see what the pay scale would be. So it's really salaries that's the cost. So,
but we have to get it done regardless,
yes,
right?
correct.
And sir, tell me your name again.
Sidney Hodgson.
And are you over the IT
Yes, sir.
area? And I think this would help Dr. Farias too. And I know you could talk about it for an hour, but could you give us just a few minutes, the big picture on our IT situation?
In terms of application, staff, budget, or?
In terms of what we need to do to get to modernize and...
Well, the biggest problem, I've been here a little over 4 years, and for 4 years we have not had an IT budget to buy any replacement equipment, PCs, switches for our network, anything. The only way we've been able to get by is, fortunately or unfortunately, we've had several staff vacancies because of the difficulty in attracting staff at our salary levels. So we've been able to use those salary dollars to purchase PC replacements over time. The problem with that is there's another limit that restricts us to spending $100,000 of operational funds for capital acquisitions each biennium. So effectively all we can spend each year is $50,000 of operational money if it's available. But that's how we've been able to get by essentially for the past 4 years, is through using salary dollars to buy PCs, as people need upgrades.
And I liked your attitude where you said, well, we'll get by with what they give us. But
Sir.
Give me some sense. Do you feel like this is a critical situation?
Definitely. I mean, we've discussed it in these committees several times over the past couple of years, but I'm sure you realize your PC over time, it slows down because it gets cluttered. New software comes out that demands greater capacity, faster computers. It takes more staff to support these computers as they break down. I think figures, I didn't bring them with me, but 40% of our PCs are older than 6 years old. 60% of them are older than 4 years old. The average life cycle on a PC, recommended life cycle, is 3 to 4 years, and on a laptop, 2 to 3 years. We have about 1/3 of our PCs are actually laptops, and they have a shorter life cycle. They break down more often because of their mobility. So, it's reaching a critical point, and which affects staff productivity, obviously. So, it's a serious matter.
Thank you.
I find it hard to understand why the legislature can't understand that. Like, these are basic tools that everybody needs to do their job every day.
Well, I think the issue is that it's difficult to ask the legislature to increase your administrative budget in these times, and so it's really difficult to find a champion to do that. So we were very fortunate that Chairman Hahn was able to work with Representative Marquez in the House, who is on the subcommittee in Article 3, and she really helped us on the House side. And Ms. Shepard on the Senate side reached out to Senator Nelson's office and helped get some spotlight on that. So that's part of the difficulty. Most legislators want to be able to go back to their districts and say, I got funding for my institution, I got funding for my constituents, and that's a natural part of the process. But it really is difficult to try and get administrative funding for state agencies. This is why we felt the need to have these items high up on our priority list of exceptional items. And in the past, we've put them on there, but you have 1 minute to talk to a legislator about your top 3 priorities, and our IT equipment and security upgrades and so forth were on that list when we talked to folks. But again, we're very grateful for what we have in both the House and the Senate, and we look forward to seeing what the conference committee will decide. Okay, thank you, Sid. So these are our remaining exceptional item requests. I'm not going to go into each of them, but I do want to point out the Norman Hackerman Advanced Research Program. This is a program that was created back in the 80s, and it funds basic research. It, at the highest, was appropriated $60 million. And it's been reduced over the years, and now it's down to $1 million. And you'll recall that the board recommended in our strategic fiscal review that if the legislature didn't appropriate our exceptional item request of a $7 million increase to make it an $8 million program, we recommended that they just eliminate the program because it really wasn't making much of an impact at $1 million, and they could use those funds for another purpose. You'll see that the Senate took into account our recommendation and reduced that program by $1 million, so it is zero funded in the Senate bill. On the House side, the $7 million exceptional item request was adopted in Article 11. And then just one other note that I want to make on this slide is you'll see the last 4 projects of website redesign, accessibility compliance, phone system upgrade, and video conference upgrade. These are some of our other IT requests that didn't make it quite as high on our priority level than our other ones, but nevertheless they are critical and important for us to do. However, if the legislature does not adopt funding for these programs, on the House side they're all on Article 11. On the Senate chose not to adopt for website redesign and accessibility compliance and put the remaining 2 in Article 11. There is currently a rider in Article 9 that prohibits us with capital projects to fund any budget item that was considered by the legislature or the committee and was denied funding. We can't even use unexpended administrative funds. Say at the end of next fiscal year, we have some administrative funds that we were able to pull together due to vacancies, for example. we wouldn't be able to use those funds to support any of these projects because of that rider in Article 9. We brought this to the attention of legislators, but it still remains. And so we're essentially, our hands are tied on over the next 16 to 17, the 2016-17 biennium, and we essentially cannot use any funding for these projects.
Is that all routinely put into Article 9?
It's been a rider in Article 9, yes, and I actually, for the first time, discovered it last year. Of course, I believe staff were aware of it, but it was brought to my attention last year when we submitted from Chairman Hahn a letter to the LBB saying we have $200,000 in unexpended funds that we'd like to use for the video conferencing upgrade, and this would allow our board, better comply with two Senate bills that had passed that last session that requires much more increased sophistication and quality in our video conferencing for meetings. And we also saw this as a cost savings for the institutions because we have a lot of advisory committee meetings in Austin that requires them to come into Austin and travel. If we had this upgrade, then we wouldn't have to pull them into Austin. They wouldn't have to travel to Austin. So therefore, we'd see some cost savings at the institutions. The LBB wrote back and said, denied that because we had the video conferencing upgrade as an exceptional item in our last LAR, and because the legislature did not approve funding for it, it did not qualify for as an expenditure. So we have to be careful about asking for an exceptional item in the future.
So that's the question is, next biennium, do we not ask for anything and then we can expend excess funds for it?
I believe we could do that.
Yeah, it just seems like it's somewhat backwards logic because if the agency, if the budget is tight, and I get that, and they're having to make some tough decisions, and I get that, but if we're innovative and we can come up with our own funds internally, why wouldn't they say, yeah, go ahead and do that? If that's a high enough priority, you can use those funds for that purpose.
I think it's because it goes against legislative intent, because they considered it and decided not to fund it. That's the legislature's intent, and that's their prerogative.
Linda, the website design, was that part of Sunset recommendation?
Yes, it was.
Okay, so
And I want to kind of explain, the website redesign is not just a simple technical redesign. It is a overhaul, and it requires a marketing consultant to help us. We have so much data on our website, so much information, and it is all over the place, and it's not user-friendly.
It's hard to navigate. I'm in there all the time, and I'm lost all the time.
Yes, and we need to simplify that. And I have spoken with staff about us needing to do this anyway, not spend money on it, but do it with existing resources and try and do it internally. And having external relations take the lead in terms of the messaging and so forth. But it would be great if we could have somebody who has that expertise and also a web designer who could do that. We're going to do what we can.
The accessibility
internally.
compliance, what does that entail?
That is making all of our websites compliant with ADA laws, state and federal laws, and we were, DIR had conducted a review and said that we were in non-compliance. And since then, we've been making every effort. Any new website that we put on, for example, the upgrade of the Helm system, we made that a requirement of the contract to make sure that the upgrade is accessibility compliant. So any opportunity we can to make sure that all of our websites are compliant, we are doing that. We're going to be able to, it won't be as a quick of a process as we'd like, but we're going to do this over the next several years and try and become compliant, but it'll take some time and effort and resources.
And
Thank you.
Did I also understand from your colleague that we were limited to 100,000 per biennium?
Yes.
So
And that's also in Article
none of
9.
these projects could even be done even if they weren't considered in the LAR.
I believe that's on, for equipment. Is that correct? Purchases?
Capital, it has to be, you're talking about capital purchase, is that what it is?
Yes, sir. For any capital purchases, you're only allowed to use up to 100,000 for the biennium of operational funds for capital purchases. So conceivably for services like web redesign, you could conceivably use operational funds for that if there were funds available. To hire a company to do that.
No.
I would like to go back just a little bit on the video conferencing upgrade. It has always puzzled me that I know we have other state meeting rooms around Austin. Is there any chance that you can use other facilities for advisory committees? Not obviously for a board meeting, but for you have a lot of advisory committees, and I understand that, but it might be a little inconvenient for staff, but so much more convenient for people who just can't, don't have the time to drive to Austin or fly for all of your committee meetings. Are there not meeting rooms at the Capitol that you could use?
Not at the Capitol, but there are other state agencies. It's just, it does take support from those agencies. For example, we have our boardroom that is, I think most recently, the CPRET board came and used our boardroom. And our staff had to provide some support to their live broadcast. And so it takes up those resources to do that.
This room here,
Yes, sir.
did they get Harold's permission to use his chair?
And the gavel. But I just think that if we're caught without any budget, I still think we should explore any other opportunities to make it more convenient for advisory committee members. But also, you're right, it does save everybody a lot of money to not have to be here in person.
You know, in this, getting on the same exact thing, all these agencies have websites. It would make inherent sense to me for the state to contract with somebody to go out agency by agency and redesign their websites so they all modernize, so they're user-friendly. Certainly ours is used by an awful lot of stakeholders. And when they have trouble navigating, then they can't use it or don't use it, and that's not the purpose. Its purpose is to be used. So, you know, how do we have a conversation with the legislature and say, are you thinking about this? Where can we achieve economies of scale? And it may be that we have a couple places in the city that have very high-powered video conferencing equipment, and it's scheduled and used by all the agencies as opposed to buying 100 different systems.
Yeah, that's a great idea. We can certainly have those conversations. Yes. Just a couple more slides, and in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all of these, but I did want to mention the Governor's University Research Initiative. These are just other budget items I felt that I wanted to bring to your attention. Both the House and Senate bills contain a rider that would appropriate funds to the coordinating board contingent on legislation that abolishes the Emerging Technology Fund and that creates Governor Abbott's University Research Initiative. The initiative would be designed to attract Nobel laureates and members of the national academies to Texas public universities. The legislation, Senate Bill 632 by Senator Frazier, was introduced with the coordinating board administering this program. But last week, Senator Frazier offered a committee substitute that has the governor's office administering the program instead of the coordinating board. So this money would no longer come to the coordinating board. It would go, it would essentially stay with the governor's office. That committee substitute is pending in Senate Natural Resource and Economic Development Committee. So we'll see. We'll be tracking that to see where it goes. On the Beyond Time, yes.
What is the cost? What did we estimate the cost of administering that program versus how it is now?
Right. Oh, we had submitted a fiscal note on the introduced version of the bill that would have us administering it at $180,000. That would support 1 FTE and 2 half-time FTE for administrative support. So we're talking about a $46 million program with 1 FTE and 2 half-time. Our understanding was that there was some concern with that fiscal note. From watching-
Concerned that it was not enough people or too many
No,
people?
that was too many.
One,
I think they anticipated a 0 fiscal note.
okay.
Because really bills that have fiscal notes in committee are very difficult to get out of committee, but the fact that there was 46 million in the Senate bill, that really equated to 0.003% in administrative costs for the program, and the feedback we got was there was concern that it was too high. But
0.003
percent, yes.
was too high?
Yes, sir. So in the hearing, we obviously listened to the hearing that following day when it was laid out in committee, and there was some concern expressed about the fiscal note, but the governor's office was there to testify that they would be able to, they had 5 FTE there that administer the Emerging Technology Fund, and that this would be a natural transition for them to administer this program. So the LBB issued a fiscal note on the committee substitute that had 7 FTE administering the program in the governor's office at $1 million a year. Since then, we've seen a new fiscal note that is significantly reduced, and I believe there are now 2 FTE administering the program at the governor's office.
But there's already 5 there.
My understanding is the abolishment of the Emerging Technology Fund would therefore abolish or remove all the funding associated with the program, which would include FTE. But they would still need staff to administer the program. So I think they're now down to 2 FTE to administer it. So
Which is where we were at before.
Yes, sir.
At least when I took math, 1 plus 1/2 plus 1/2 is 2.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Could I go ahead, Sater?
Go ahead. Linda, the dollars that we administer total, how much percentage is dedicated for administration?
The rider.
Percentage-wise.
Yeah, I don't believe that there's a specification in the bill or in the rider.
Right.
So
But no, practical. If you are administrating $1 billion, how much of those dollars go into running the show?
typically, you don't want to do more than 5%. So 0.003% is a pretty efficient way to administer the program. We have the expertise here at the coordinating board to administer the program, and so we were very conservative in the fiscal note. But typically, what happens is when we're asked for a fiscal note on a bill that will create additional resources at the coordinating board, say a new study or whatever, we will submit a fiscal note for administration, and then that typically gets zeroed out by the LBB.
So there is no system or process by the legislatures basically saying that agency, if you are managing these many dollars, then by default there's a formula that between 6 to 10% is your administration, and you can do your IT, salaries, everything. All of your budget should come from between 6 to 10%. There's nothing like that?
No. We try to do that in our fiscal notes, but once it leaves our office and goes to the Legislative Budget Board, then they do their own analysis, and most of the time they'll zero out our fiscal note. And it gets down to if a bill has a fiscal note, it's very difficult to pass out of committee. So there's that pressure. But We try to be as efficient and as frugal as possible in terms of our estimates. But we've taken on a lot.
That's a stress on every agency's leadership, because if they give you certain dollars and say these are the administrative dollars, certain percentage, then you don't have to deal with all these issues, because then you know that there are dollars coming in to manage all the other needs. So even not only just the staff, but also at the legislation level, they don't have to deal with it if they give you a percentage.
Well, I agree.
You need to hire lobbyists.
I agree with you. Related to administration, or did you have another question?
Go ahead, if you're responding to Sater.
No, I was actually going to move on.
Okay. The Governor's University Research Initiative is contingent upon legislation eliminating the
Yes.
Emerging Technology Fund, which is, that's back to the Texas Research Incentive Program.
So on the House side, the House has a rider in Article 9 that would appropriate $67.5 million to the TRIP, which would come out of the Emerging Technology Fund.
Okay.
So part of that would go to TRIP, and then the other part would go to the governor's initiative.
Okay, but I guess what I'm trying to figure out, we've got 8 emerging research universities, right?
Yes.
And of those 8, University of Houston and Texas Tech have qualified for those funds in the last biennium. Is that right? Didn't they hit
Well,
the?
they've all, for the
No, but I
matching
mean,
fund, the TRIP. Oh, NRUF. The National Research University Fund. That's
Okay.
a separate fund.
Not
from-
related to any of this?
No.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
But the TRIP program is the purpose is to move them towards National Research University status, because the more research dollars that they raise and expend is.
Well, I guess my question is, if that emerging technology fund or whatever was eliminated, is that going to impact those 2 universities that are already getting the funds from the other program?
Oh, I don't know the answer to that question.
This is a little bit of a moving target, but the NREF dollars would not be affected, so the UH and Texas Tech or whoever else qualifies in the future, as long as the legislature continues to appropriate dollars for that purpose, they would receive funding. Thank you. David Gardner, I'm sorry. What would happen, I think, to all of these institutions if that fund, the 53 million, what is it now? It's 46.
46 on the Senate side, 56 on the House.
If those funds went away, it would eliminate one resource that can be critical for all of them in terms of developing to the next level. As you know, if you hire its intent is to hire somebody at a very high level. They mentioned Nobel laureates. That's less likely than members of one of the national academies of engineering or science. But if they hire one of those folks, it may take you $5 to $10 million, including lab and what set up and various other things to bring them in. But they typically bring with them sometimes millions of dollars of research with them, which will continue for a period of time. So it's a very good investment. Most of the schools that are emerging research institutions don't have many dollars to go after that. I know probably 4 or 5 years ago, at one instance I remember University of Houston received funding for someone from, I believe, Sweden, who came over, and he was one of the 2 experts in the world in his particular area and some area related to health, and the other one happened to be at Methodist Hospital. So that brought in the 2 leading researchers in the world who were just a matter of miles apart. They knew each other, and that individual brought, if I recall correctly, something like 16 staff to the U.S., and I believe he was actually one of the voters for the Nobel, people who got to vote for the Nobel Prize. So there have been instances like that around the state where the these programs have, I'm not sure which ones, but I would be surprised if UT Dallas hasn't received dollars along these lines. Maybe UTSA, a number of schools. It's an important resource to them.
Okay.
Very quickly, the Beyond Time program I mentioned earlier, but I did want to note that even with the elimination of the program and renewals that we'll be providing, we'll still have over $230 million in outstanding loans that will still be required to administer. And right now, we have concerns with House Bill 7, which has some language in there that would prohibit us from using administrative costs to administer the program. So we're trying to work with Representative Darby's office to address that in the event that that bill passes. One other item that I forgot to mention on this slide is $8.1 million that was appropriated to the coordinating board in the Senate bill for autism research centers at institutions of higher education that provide evidence-based behavioral services and training. The funding would support parent-directed treatment, training for teachers and paraprofessionals, and research and development of innovative treatment for autism. The coordinating board will be required to collect data and submit an annual report to the legislature on these programs. Very quickly, next steps. We're waiting for the Speaker and the Lieutenant Governor to make their appointments of 5 members each to serve on the conference committee for House Bill 1. And usually the conference committee consists of the chairs of the House Appropriations and Senate Finance Committees, as well as 4 other members that served as chair of whatever article, say Article 3 is typically represented on there because of the large budgets in those articles. Conferees, according to Senate and House rules, can only reconcile points in which the House and the Senate bill differ. So they cannot alter figures that are identical in both bills. If both bills include a spending item, but they differ on the amount, they cannot set the amount lower than the smaller of the 2 amounts, nor they increase it above the larger amount. If an item appears only in one bill, the conferees may include or delete it, and if they include it, they can't reduce it. They may reduce it, but they can't increase it. And finally, they may not include any item that does not appear in either bill unless they seek permission from the House and the Senate to go outside the bounds. And that happens, that does happen. That concludes my presentation. I apologize for the length, but I'm happy to answer any other questions if you do have any.
Thank you, Linda. That was very thorough. Next item is item 5, financial reports. The first item is going to be a review of the year-to-date fiscal year 2015 financial report. Just so the members understand, in 2009, the board requested a quarterly report at every AOC meeting. Ken Martin, Assistant Commissioner for Financial Services and CFO, is going to provide us a brief overview, and this item will not require any official action. Ken, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Typically, I walk through this report and have a couple key highlights. If you don't mind some indulgence, I'll go through it in a little more detail because we're a new member, and if you have any questions, please feel free as I go through it. If you turn to the first page, there was a question asked regarding our administrative costs in total. If you look at the first page, it breaks out in the yellow section what we call our operating strategies. So we have funding for both.
Do we have a handout for this, or is it already in the agenda book? Yeah, it's in the agenda book. Under tab 5A. Please proceed.
Okay. In the left section there on the first page, you have the operating strategies titled A and I. So we have within our General Appropriations Act, I'll be talking goals, And in the Act, it has our A goal and our I goal, and those are our operating. We have I as our indirect and A as our direct operating. So A are the individuals working directly with programs and administering the programs, and the I are myself, finance team, IT, Linda's team, some of Dr. Gardner's team, et cetera. The commissioner, we're indirect. We're supporting all of the programs in generality. So it just provides you an idea. And we'll go in more detail as I go through each one of these pages to provide how some of that breaks out. But if you look between the two, on the right side, there's the trustee strategy budget. So these are the monies that we have for our specific programs that we have out there. And the question was asked, what is our percentage of our administration to our total? It's around 1.5%. Turning to the next page, this provides a little more breakout, and it provides by each one of the goals. So the far left, you see goal A, goal B, goal C. I won't walk through each one, but it provides you the breakout of those differences and the remaining funding where it lies within each one of those goals. And again, on the next page that we go to, page 3, we'll provide the actual trustee budget by strategy. So the goal, the A goal, as you see up top, or the next section, the B goal, gets broken down to individual strategies, what we'll call maybe programs, and then you can see the actual budget, the fiscal year-to-date expenditures, encumbrances. An encumbrance is an item that we have obligated. Maybe we have a contract with the entity, and therefore we have committed the funds, and we will note it there, but we haven't actually expended the funds yet. And then we have our total year-to-date of the expenditures and the encumbrances. So now we know how much year-to-date we've committed contractually or spent, and then to the far right you'll see what's remaining, our available budget. A couple points on the available budget as we get closer to year-end that I note. If you look at the B11 in the B section there, close the GAPS Affordability, our Texas Grant Program, and if you go to B112, our Texas Armed Services Scholarship Program, we had remaining funds. It was not fully subscribed this year, so we had about $1.5 million remaining in our our Armed Services Scholarship Program. In our General Appropriations Act and Rider 33, we are able to transfer any remaining funds in that program to Texas Grants, of which we have, and we added that to the $3.7 million that was remaining, and we performed reallocations back to institutions. So we solicited institutions' input, and if they could use some remaining funding, they did. We have a prescriptive reallocation methodology. We performed that, and we reallocated those funds out. Visibility today, feedback from the institutions that we expect them to fully utilize those funds. Down on the next item, B12, you can see the Beyond Time program. We have approximately $16 million remaining. With that, that is a combination of both GR, which goes to our private institutions, but also GRD, which is the tuition set-asides. GRD we're not allowed to transfer to other programs. We did perform reallocations on that program as well to try and get as much utilization as possible. Because of the impending cut, maybe, to renewal only in the program, some institutions were reluctant to request additional funds, and so we do not expect to utilize all those funds by year end. The GRD portion will go back into the GRD account as unappropriated, and depending on which House bill or any bill comes to fruition, these funds any remaining funds after renewals would go back to the institution. So at least it would not be lost. It would not lapse. The GR would lapse, but the GRD would not. And just another highlight on the B13, just a little further down, the T-STEM program. We have about $10 million remaining there. This program, we received $25 million approximately from the Texas Guarantee Student Loan Corporation a few years ago. And this was to fund this particular program. It was donated funds. It was not funded by general revenue. And we spend approximately $5 to $6 million annually on this program. So we expect to have available funds each year, and as we draw down on that $25 million, this is the remainder that we expect to approximately flow into the next biennium and be utilized for the next 2 years.
So if that was donated and not appropriated, and you've got $10 million and you're spending about $5 million a year, we probably got, what, 2 more years of funding?
Yes,
and then that line item goes away?
It would not be funded. So, we would have to be in the next following legislative session be funded by general revenue. These funds are appropriated, to just one correction, it does not comprise general revenue that was appropriated, but donated funds are appropriated to spend in our General Appropriations Act, but it is not general revenue. We would need another source of funding for that to continue the program if necessary. And if you go to the next page, or 2 pages down, let's go to page 5. Up in the top, it says Goal G, Federal Trustee Report. Because of the federal programs run differently, they don't work on a state appropriation year. They work on a federal fiscal year, plus they can cross bienniums because of their funding. We pulled the federal funds out of the report we just reviewed. You will not see the G goal there. We had to create a separate report that fit the methodology of how federal funds can be spent. So the federal fiscal year starts in October. It can cross our bienniums, does not follow UB authority like general revenue, et cetera. So we created a separate report that better fit the federal funding flow, if you will. And that's what this report has here. And then on the next page, there's a few pages. I'm not going to go into any detail, but this is our budget adjustments that we perform. So we create an operating budget at the beginning, before the beginning of each year, and we'll be beginning that process and have a review in July with our next year's operating budget to this committee. And then after the operating budget is approved by the board, any subsequent adjustments that we make, changes, are then noted, run through commissioner approval, or we have a budget adjustment policy that is in place, and they will be noted here on this report so that we have transparency to the board and to the AOC of what adjustments we've been making throughout the year that from our operating budget starting point. And what I'll do is I'm just going to, I'll skip a few slides, continue through a couple pages of the budget adjustment. You'll see a cash balance summary. This is a report, just as it states, how much we have in unappropriated cash balance. In the top pie chart up there, it has the available funds, both in our, what we call SLA and TOP fund. Those are basically our student loan funds. And that's where we have funding where we can administer, disperse funds from for student loans. And then we have our debt service funds down below, which are dedicated to paying our debt service, the bonds that we've issued over time to support a student loan program. If you go to the next page, it just provides a little bit of detail at the bottom of a monthly loan activity. You can see the beginning balances. I'll defer your attention to the far right without going through each one of these line items. But you can see that we have approximately $1.4 billion in outstanding loans as of the end of March, which this report runs through. And then it provides a little bit of detail, some of the activities. On the next page, you'll see the breakout of what that $1.4 million comprises. So you can see that the very top of the blue box down below, approximately $1.2 billion is our Henson Hazelwood loans. Approximately $239 million are beyond time loans. We have our Armed Services Scholarship loans, which is a new program. It's on its 4th year. And then we have a couple older programs, our Teach for Texas, which is not an active program. It's just individuals on repayment right now for this particular program. And then some loans that were issued with revenue bonds back in 1991. And the subsequent page goes into a bit of a breakout with our loan funds and our debt service funds at the very bottom. You can see in the orange title box, loan fund cash flow, we're projecting right now approximately $113 million available to issue for loans. And to the far right in the green, we have debt service, as I mentioned, and we have state general obligation bonds that we pay. When we get repayments for all the loans that we've issued and the borrowers are making payments to us, we have to put that in a dedicated account. That's our our debt service account. And that has to accrue to be able to pay our future obligations this year and next year for debt service. Yes, sir.
Did you said that once you have funded, then you receive the funds? Is that what I heard? That you have to fund first and then you receive the funds?
Fund fullest. I'm not sure the question. I apologize.
But I kind of, maybe I misheard, but I heard that once you have funded, then you receive the funds that come and you put it in a separate account. No.
Well, let me step back. I'm not sure, but maybe this will help. Is we issue loans, we issue general obligation bonds, and then we get our proceeds from those bonds. That goes into an account, our student loan account. Those funds are dispersed to issue student loans.
Correct.
And then the students are in school. Once they graduate, meet the deferment or beyond, they're in repayment. We start receiving those repayments.
Okay.
Those repayments will go to our debt service account.
Okay, so nobody has to bridge the loan.
No.
The dollars actually come to you from bonds.
That initially come to us from bonds. There is no, we have not ever funded this program through general revenue or general revenue dedicated. It is self-supporting by itself as well for administrative cost. And that is correct. So the bonds are the initial funds that we start to issue loans, and then the continuation to pay those bonds back in the future, all those repayments that we receive as they start paying off their loans.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Any other questions for Ken? Okay, and there's no action necessary on that. The next item is 5B. It is adopting a staff recommendation to the committee relating to interest rate reduction for the student loans issued by the Hinson Hazelwood Student Loan Program. Ken Martin is going to again present this.
This is one of those items that I'm pleased to present and provide some good news. As we discussed, we have the student loan program, and which has been in effect since 1965. It is a well-run program. It is funded well, and I'll go through some details. And what we're fortunate to be in is, as others that have refinanced either mortgages or bought new cars, et cetera, we're in a very low interest rate environment right now. And our recent bond issue, we were able to receive a very favorable interest rate in that issue. And what I'll do is go through some detail. Are you able to see on that side?
We should all have a handout titled item 5B, which I think is, if you want to just follow along with that, Ken.
Let's do that. Page 2, just discussion topics. I'll talk a little bit about a cash flow analysis that we perform with a financial advisor and that supports us, and then I'll discuss a little bit on interest rates nationally and our proposal for our interest rate as well. On the next page, we talk about the cash flow analysis. We have an analysis that's performed with our financial advisor, and this analysis that they perform is basically a projection of our cash flow needs to pay, as I discussed, our debt service and the loan repayments coming in. And how does that align over the course of the existing debt that we have to make sure, are we projected to receive enough money each year to be able to pay that debt that we have coming due, whether it's interest or principal. The financial advisor that we have, First Southwest, performs that analysis based on our input as well as any suggestions and recommendations that they have. The results are reviewed by the financial advisor and coordinating board. We hold a separate meeting. We perform this review annually at periodic times. This analysis in particular on the next page, page 4, was performed in January. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the assumptions. There's many, multiple, but here's just some of the major assumptions in there. We do have some assumptions for our default rate because we do want to take that into account, how many loans will default, so we know what our write-offs, if you will be. We talk about origination fee because that is income per se from our standpoint, and as well as interest earnings on loan fund balances that are sitting at the comptroller and the Treasury, and a couple other items going through, as well as our current 5.25% interest rate, as well as our proposed interest rate, which we'll discuss in a couple more slides. The next slide discusses the cash flow results. The coordinating board is able to meet its debt obligations annually throughout the remainder of the current debt that we have. It's positive cash flow every year. And with all of that, we also maintain a $30 million contingency reserve of cash in our Texas Opportunity Plan Fund, our TOP fund, to meet any surge, excess demand in student loans that weren't projected, because we typically issue our bonds about once a year. We need to have a reserve just in case there's a higher influx of demand. We would be able to dip into that. That gives us allows us opportunity to then start working on a new bond issue. On the next slide, we discussed a little bit about interest rates. So we're not going into the numbers yet. That'll be further down. But just a couple factors to consider as we talk about different types of loan products. So the coordinating board on the left side, we have a deferred repayment plan. So the individual goes to school anytime, whether they're a freshman to senior, they get a loan. Their interest accrues, but there's no they don't have to make repayments until they graduate. They have a 6-month grace period, and then they go into making repayments. There are other products out there on the right side that have immediate repayment. You can receive a favorable interest rate, but as soon as you get the loan, you're a freshman, you have to start making payments on that loan. So obviously not an ideal product sometimes for an individual that's self-supported within school. Our product is a fixed interest rate, and it's not credit-based. So our interest rate today and what I'm proposing is a fixed interest rate irrespective of the credit rating. And then we have a credit rating-based origination fee, which was discussed last April, I believe, a year ago, going to that methodology. Or actually, it was discussed a little earlier and implemented in April. And that was a tiered origination fee based on credit rating. So higher credit rating paid zero origination fee, et cetera. And in totality, on average, our origination fee used to be about 3%. It's running about 0.7%. So it's running about 70 basis points right now. So most individuals, as you can see, are not paying an origination fee when they're getting the loan. And the interest is not capitalized while you're in school. So our financial advisor who sees other types of programs and products, while the individual's in school, they're accruing interest, but other programs, other states, et cetera, will capitalize that interest, meaning when they graduate, they take what you've accrued in interest and add that to your principal. And now your subsequent interest for future years is based on a higher principal balance. So you're paying higher interest, accruing higher interest each month. We do not capitalize that interest. You accrue the interest, but that's it. Your principal will remain flat.
I need you to explain that a little bit more.
Yeah.
They accrue the interest while they're in school.
While they're in school.
They graduate. Let's say they borrowed $1,000 and they were in school for 4 years and the interest was $100 a year. So when they graduate, they owe $1,400.
If they
borrowed $1,000, it's $100
you borrowed
a year.
$1,000 if you accrued $400 in interest. So now when you graduate, you had $1,000, $400 of interest accrued at that point. The $400 would be added to your $1,000 to your principal balance, and now you owe $1,400. So you owe $1,400 combined. The difference is now it's $1,400 of principal. So now the following month, when your interest is calculated dollar amount, it's multiplied by $1,400, not multiplied by $1,000. So your
Okay, so how does the $400 get paid back?
It's the same way you would pay back principal on any other loan. It's just it's built into that amortization stream.
So, but it is being capitalized at the end, but the only difference is the interest expenses are not being charged interest expense during the school period.
They're accruing interest in both in our loan and some others that capitalize. They're accruing interest at the same time while they're in school. But when they graduate, it's what happens to your principal balance. And in ours, the principal balance remains the same. You just have your existing interest, and then as you make future payments, it's paying your interest and then paying your principal. This takes the interest and adds it to the principal, where your now payment is going to be higher because it's multiplied by a higher principal balance at the same interest rate.
So the first payments that are made are to pay the accrued interest, and then you get to the principal?
For our loan or for the capitalized? For our loan, yes, that would be correct. Your first payments will pay down your interest, and then once you're at that point, then it's your interest and principal on an ongoing basis.
So I think I got it now. the interest is not capitalized while they're still in school. It becomes capitalized 6 months after they graduate.
6 months or whatever their period is. It could be the date they graduate, whatever other lender, there's different programs out there, but whatever that program would have, that's correct.
So they're not charging interest on the interest expense during the schooling period.
Okay.
But ultimately, it will be capitalized upon graduation and during the payback period, and they will be charged interest on the interest during that payback period.
That's effectively.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
And again, ours does not. Then going to the next slide, and the next page. What I want to do is provide a little bit of overview of some of the other entities that are within some states and their current interest rates that were out there. This was as of, based on the Education Finance Council report, 2014-2015 report. You can see these are based on fixed interest rate, so they're not variable, so it was comparable to our products. It was not based on a immediate repayment in school. This was based on deferred payment products that were similar to ours. So I took out a sample of these various different states and put them in order, and then you can see with the next slide what we're proposing to go down to. We're currently at 5 1/4, and we're proposing to go down to 4.5%. And keep in mind, our last bond issue, we had announced, I believe it was last meeting, or maybe I believe it was the last meeting in January, last bond sale, we had just under a 3% effective yield on our entire bond of $81 million of bonds. So that helps us be able to fund. This is for future loans going forward that we would issue. So as of a point beginning of January, which is our policy, then we would have any subsequent loan from that point forward would be at 4.5%. Yes, sir.
What does the acronym CAL stand for?
CAL is our college access loan. So it's part of our Hinson Hazelwood. Within our Hinson Hazelwood loan program, we had federal loans, et cetera. This is the only active loan within the Hinson Hazelwood loan product today.
Is there any state that charges less than we were at 5.25?
Not that I'm aware of for the same product, no.
For the same product?
For the same product.
Okay.
There
At
are
4.5, we're going to be considerably better than everybody else.
Right. At a fixed rate, deferred interest. Again, there was, I think Rhode Island had a immediate repayment, and some of these are credit rating-based interest, too. Some states have those. So the higher your credit rating, similar to a mortgage or car financing, that the higher your credit rating, probably the lower interest rate you could receive. But ours is not. Ours is a fixed interest rate, irrespective of credit rating.
And so to your point, David, so it's the lowest in the country.
It's the lowest in the country. That absolutely is correct.
Is Indiana the second lowest, or is there several others that are in our ballpark?
Indiana was the second lowest for this type of product.
And there's a pretty big
Right.
gap between the two.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
Great.
And we were already there at 5 1/4. We felt we were. Our financial advisor was telling us, based on their knowledge, we were already there at that number. But again, we don't make money on this program. We're not, for profit. All we need to do is self-fund the program and our administrative cost. And so with that bond issue we had and the favorable interest rate environment that we're in right now, we are able to offer this lower rate.
Great.
So our the bond floater, do they float within U.S. or international markets?
They are state general obligation bonds.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of any purchasers that were international.
Any other questions? Linda?
I just want to make one comment that with the 4.5%, even at the 4.25% interest rate, this is a great option for our students in Texas, particularly with the Beyond Time program going away, which is a zero interest loan program. So this is, I think, a very good thing for our students in Texas.
Well, it's
Well,
like a 1.25 over prime.
Yeah, no, this is another example of Texas doing it better than anyone else.
I've got some construction I need done up at ABC. I was hoping I could access some of this. Yeah.
No.
Mr. Chairman, is
I have
this,
to go to school for that.
this is an action item, so you're looking for a motion?
Yes, sir, if you'd like to make
I
it.
so move.
Thank you. I need a second. Okay, any further discussion or questions? All in favor, say aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion passes. Next item is item C. This is an update on the loan management system upgrade, and Ken Martin is still on deck, and he'll provide a brief update. This does not require any action.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll keep this brief. Every meeting or any particular meeting that you desire, we can do it on an ongoing basis, but we agreed last meeting to provide you an update on our loan management system and the acquisition. To take a step back, about a year ago approximately, maybe a little bit more, we have a current loan management system with a vendor, and we agreed and received board approval to go out to RFP and solicit future other vendors and a new contract. Our current contract expires at the end of 2016. And so we did so. We had the RFP, we solicited bids, we reviewed the proposals, we came back to the board. After the fact, we had to go to chair, vice chair, and AOC chair at the time because of the disclosure of the vendor to receive approval to proceed and into negotiations, of which we did. And then we came back to the board and discussed the vendor, discussed the favorable pricing, et cetera. And once we had that, we went into contracting phase, and that's been completed on our side. The contract is developed. It was sent to the vendor approximately 2 weeks ago and is currently under vendor legal review at this time. So we hope to have a contract here in the next signed contract in the next couple weeks, where we can begin the actual implementation, planning phase, et cetera. We have been performing activities internally. We're not waiting for a signed contract. We do have our own internal project plan we've developed. It's tentative based on the vendor's plan. We'll marry those two up once we have a signed contract. We've still had some phone calls with the vendor, obviously no charge on their side, et cetera, because there's not a commitment, but to just make sure that we're aligned in the development of the project plan and other factors and so on. So we're still proceeding, even internally, looking at our current process and mapping out our current processes to better understand what we're doing today or what we need today. And then when we have the software, it helps us with our testing and what have you, to make sure that we've married that up and make sure our processes today align with the software, if we need to modify our processes with those. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Members, any questions? Comment?
I just wanted to make a comment. I really, this is a major project, and it's a $1 million contract that I believe Chairman Hahn is going to be signing off on under Governor Abbott's new
Correct.
Directive. It's a multi-million-dollar contract over the next how many years?
It's about a $3.6 million contract for 4 years. We have 4 standard years, and it's an 8-year contract. We have 4 years with two 2-year options after that. So the dollar amount that will be on the contract is for 4 years, and then we can renew automatically by invoking the option, and then that'll be an amendment we'll have to do, and that'll be a new dollar amount for that period, and then we'll have another 2-year period after that. So it's an 8-year period that it has.
Commissioner, this is one of his major priorities, to make sure that this is a smooth transition from the old system to the new system. And so I thought it was important to keep the board updated regularly on our progress towards implementation. It's going to take up a lot of resources in ISS and in our loan program staff, and it's going to be a much better system for our users and for our staff internally for our loan program. So we're really excited about the new system, and Nelnet is the contractor. So hopefully we'll get a signed contract here soon so that we can get to work in implementing it.
And you mentioned a directive from the governor that requires the chairman's signature. Can you give us the parameters of when the chairman's signature would be required under the governor's directive? So just for the members, that's new. I think we ought to know when we would have to have that.
The governor issued a directive on January 28th of this year to increase transparency in the contracting process, and at the same time announce support for Senator Nelson's contracting legislation. At that point in time, she had filed, I believe, the first bill pertaining to contracting and trying to modify the current contract process that state agencies utilize so that the whole process became more transparent. And the governor was simply echoing her idea that we needed more transparency. He is likewise championing that idea. And contracts that exceed $1 million are to be signed by the chair of the board or by the commissioner if the board so directs that the commissioner can do so.
Any other comments on that item?
Well, so do we address that? Or I mean, right now it's set up that the chairman does that.
I think this.
How do you
is
feel
just an
about that,
update.
Harold?
Yeah, we've already passed this.
So we
an
don't need to
update.
do anything?
Last year.
I mean, that's what confused me on.
This item's not a voting item. This was already passed and approved for the vendor and negotiation.
Right. That's not what I'm asking.
No.
I guess what you just said at the end, Bill, was what I was asking. You said that the chairman of the agency signs the contract unless the board directs the commissioner to sign it. Did I hear that wrong?
No, you heard that correctly, and that's the directive we received from the governor. And no legislation has thus far been enacted, and of course not signed into law. There could be legislation between now and the end of the session that would modify that. Indeed, some has been proposed that would move that from $1 million to a $5 million target. It's still a bit too early to speculate where that will result, but we cannot turn this into an action item today, but if it be the board's pleasure, of course we can do so at the next, not tomorrow, but a meeting thereafter.
Linda?
That's what I was going to say. Right now, we're operating with the board chairman doing that until the board can decide whether you want to designate the commissioner.
That's what I'm asking. So we'll have a somewhat of a discussion about that.
Yes, if
Okay.
that is the will of the board, we will bring that as a rule to you for adoption.
Okay.
And if you'd like it to just be up for consideration, but you simply want to thresh it out and have a discussion, we can bring that to you as well and have it as an action item depending on the outcome of whatever discussion.
From my perspective, I think that'd be a good little conversation.
Quickly,
We'll do it.
Does the chair have any problem with this? Because I think it's a good idea. I think it's more in line with what Governor Abbott wants, to have the chairman of the board signing the contract. Unless you have
I certainly don't have any problem with the board directing Raymond to sign these contracts. but I'm like John. I don't think that's what the governor had in mind. I think the governor had in mind that the chairman of the agency has to sign those contracts.
I think so too.
And for what it's worth, this contract was shared with Chairman Hahn in advance of it being sent to the vendor. And so I hope you had sufficient time to review. Okay.
So for our purposes, we'll next meet in July. By then, we'll know if legislation passed or
Yes, sir.
if we get further guidance from the governor modifying this.
That's
and then
correct.
We can have a discussion
Sure.
and make a recommendation at that time. So we probably need to include it as an action item so it's posted. But I think at this point in time, the governor has essentially ordered the chairman to sign the contract. So we really don't have a whole lot to talk about other than sign the contract.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. So I guess, Ken, have you talked about the RFQ process for bond counsel yet? You have not. So this last item is under the financial report section, and it's the RFQ process for bond counsel and financial advisors, and it's in your agenda item there. And this will be Ken's last update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Bond counsel and our financial advisor both support our loan program. We discussed last meeting in January permission to seek an RFQ to go out and solicit bids for new financial advisor, or not new, but solicit bids for financial advisor position as well as bond counsel. Both contracts expire 8/31 of 15, so the end of this fiscal year, and we have done so. We have issued the RFQ for both the financial advisor and bond counsel to independent. We are in the process of receiving bids back for the both items. We did receive bids back on the bond counsel, of which we only received 2, and 1 was disqualified for a minor technical item, but we had to disqualify, and therefore, in discussion with general counsel, we elected to repost that bond counsel item. And so that has gone out, and in May, it will close, I believe May 10th. I may be off on that date, and then we'll perform the evaluations at that time.
You have a sense as to why we got such a low response rate?
I do not. It actually surprised me. There were a couple entities that I thought that would have and did not.
Mr. Martin, how are we making potential bond counsel aware of this opportunity?
It is posted, defer to Mr. Franz on the actual procurement process and the posting, but I believe it's posted for 30 days.
But posted where?
To the Texas Register.
Because I agree with Dr. Tesher. It seems surprising you'd only get 2 responses, and one of the things you think about is, are we getting the word out to people in the appropriate way? What else can we do?
Again, I'll defer to general counsel that has a procurement side on that question. What our options are.
Didn't we have 5 last time? 4 or 5?
Actually, the years blur a little bit, but we've had as many as 7 at one point. We've had as few as 3 previously, and we may have had, maybe it was the last time we had 5. What we have done historically is notify the firms that traditionally do bond work for state entities, local entities, et cetera. And I don't know if Ken has done that at this point this time or not. We can still do it because we're just going back out, as I understand it right now, in a new search or new bid period. And so it's easy enough to send a letter to those firms. There's a very limited number of firms that actively participate in a large-scale way in the bond business.
Well, I would encourage that, because what you got on the first round was just our existing bond counsel and then another firm that was disqualified?
The other way around. It was our existing bond counsel that was disqualified.
Is that right? Okay.
So is without disclosing the disqualification, is that a correctable disqualification such they could come back and bid again, or is there a defect that they can't overcome?
No, they can easily come back and bid again. It was a minor technical violation.
Okay. So is
our purchaser picked up on that.
Sure. Is it best practices, or is it a requirement to repost if we only one qualified bid?
Best practices.
Okay. I agree with doing that, and I agree with Mr. Steen that we probably ought to go back and write a letter to the people who have ever bid before and really kind of solicit the most open and vigorous bidding process we can.
Absolutely.
Anything else?
Where are we on the financial advisor?
It is due to come down towards the end of this month as far as the posting, and
okay.
we'll solicit the bids, and both will be in May time frame, general in May, that we'll have all the bids in and re-review, including the.
You'll have to sign for that also.
So our council mentioned that the using that list, and we're going to do that for the bond counsel. Is there something we'll do also for financial advisors where we can
do that? Yeah.
And what will you do?
We'll work with our purchaser on what the prior bids were, prior entities. I believe it was 2 years ago. I wasn't in the role, so I'm not completely privy of that, but I'll work with them to research what timing that was and who, and see if we can get something out.
Right.
Ken, thank you very much. Our next section is audit under item 6A. First item is a discussion of standard number 114, the auditor's communication with those charged with governance. And with us today is Susan Warren with KPMG LLP, who's going to present this item. And Susan, Ms. Warren, if you would introduce your cohort, please.
There we go. Sorry. Rebecca Goldstein with KPMG, who is also on the engagement. What we'd like to do is go through our...
Can I ask maybe a preliminary question? So the last committee meeting we had, and I don't have the minutes, so I don't know what was followed up at the board meeting, but we approved the issuance of requests for proposals to conduct the audit. This is what we're talking about for the agency-wide financials?
No, sir.
This is not what we're
This
doing?
is the last year on the contract you currently have that we are executing to perform the audit.
Okay, good. Excuse me.
That's okay. So this is the planning session with the committee and board members to do the 2014 audit. And so what I'd like to do is just kind of walk through the required communication under the auditing standards to kind of let you know what it is we're doing. And then we do have some questions that we like to solicit your input into in the planning process. You can see from the agenda that we'll have a slide that will talk about the client service team. We'll just remind you what it is you've hired us to do, basically the objective of an audit. We'll walk through the responsibilities of management, the committee, and KPMG. We'll give you an overview of our process, our methodology, talk a little bit about the risk assessment that we've performed to date to kind of give you an idea where that we feel the risk issues are here at the coordinating board. Get into a little bit more about the audit planning and scoping. And then number 7 I will mention is we do have a new pronouncement this year, GASB 65. So the accounting standards come out and they issue pronouncements that basically change the way the financial reports come together. And so we do have a new one that will be implemented for August 2014 called GASB 65. The primary difference will be that in the past, you all were just talking about bonds. Historically, when you issued bonds, you have issuance costs that goes with those. You would capitalize those and depreciate them over the life of your bonds. Going forward in GASB 65, those are expensed on day one. So those are no longer capitalizable. So that's the significant, that'll be the one change that we'll make with GASB 65. So the client service team, just to give you an idea there, Susan Warren, the audit partner. We do have a second partner, Travis Hunter. It is KPMG's policy to always have 2 partners on an engagement to do a secondary look before we issue financial statements to make sure we haven't missed anything of major materiality. We have 2 managers, Rebecca, who does the audit, and we have Chris Stone, who does all the IT work, works with Sid and his group. We, of course, have a tax senior manager that just to look at state and local tax issues. We do use internal audit out of Mark's division for 50 hours, and then we also subcontract with R. Mendoza to do staffing from a minority perspective. From just the objective of the audit, we do put an opinion on those financial statements that management has prepared with your oversight and direction to comply with all applicable generally accounting principles, which is GASB for coordinating board. We do this, we plan and perform reasonable assurance that they're free from material misstatement. So we have to look at risk areas, figure out our audit approach, and focus on the areas with risk. When executing that, it does involve looking at accounting records. So we actually do look at bank statements and bank reconciliations and checks and deposits, and we actually get into the source documents in an audit and look at that. And we also evaluate the appropriateness of accounting policies, 1, that they're consistent from year to year, and 2, when we have a new GASB, how is that being implemented? And of course, the significant accounting estimates, which will be your loan loss reserve. From management responsibilities, this is what the management team does before we get here to do the audit. They establish those policies. They prepare those financial statements. They basically monitor their internal controls over the processes throughout the year. They obviously have to comply with all laws and requirements that are applicable to the coordinating board. And then 5 and 6, they make that all available to us during the audit. And then at the end of the engagement, when we're done, they do sign a representation letter, which you receive a copy of in our July briefing. That includes a variety of things, but 3 of the more significant items is they do basically attest that they've any significant deficiency or control deficiency they were aware of, they have made us aware of. If they knew of any fraud from a coordinating board employee, they have made us aware of that. And then there is the occasion in some audit environments where you have what we call uncorrected misstatements. So those would be differences that we would find, and we would agree to disagree, and they would not be reflected in the financials. So they're called uncorrected. If we had any of those as scheduled, those would be given to you in July, but management has to attest that they agree that they're not material. To the, basically the committee's responsibilities, really what this slide tells you is you oversee this process we just discussed. So, slide 6, so in addition to putting the opinion on it, which is what number 1 is, what does KPMG have to do? We have to follow all of our auditing standards with professional skepticism. There's a whole list there, number 3 of all the professional standards we have to follow. We do have to evaluate internal control over financial reporting as a basis for designing our audit procedures. So we understand how the financials are put together, how those transactions work, how the cash flows, so we can find the risk areas. Of course, we communicate with the committee here on all required information, which generally is in 2 parts. Part of it's now and then part of it's in July. And then if we were to have any control issues, 6 tells you that we come back to you with those in writing. There is other information in financial statements. If you can remember the coordinating board's financial statements, there's a management discussion analysis up front, and then there's some budget schedules at the back that are required. Those are kind of on either side of the actual true financial statements, which would be your balance sheet, your income statement, your footnotes. And so those all get combined together and issued together with an opinion in there. And so what this tells you is that in that opinion, we have extra paragraphs that call out the management discussion analysis and the budget schedules because they don't have the same level of assurance as the balance sheet and income statement. So what we do is we have different opinion paragraphs that tell you what we did to those, which primarily is we read them, we ticked and tied them back to the audited financial statements, make sure they made sense. We got support from the client, from your management team to make sure that the numbers in that area were supported by underlying documentation. Just made sure it was consistent with our understanding of the flow of funds within the agency, and then we combine those with the financial statements. Just a pictorial look at our kind of overall audit approach and methodology. Obviously, engagement setup is the contracting process, which has occurred for 14. The risk assessment phase is what we're almost finished with, but it's where we meet with management, meet with internal audit, meet with one-on-one with certain members, kind of get an idea of different people's perspectives of risk. We also ask questions about fraud, possible areas where that might happen. We bring all that together. We bring our IT people in. We look at your experts, which are your bond counsels and your financial advisors. We look at our service organizations where you've outsourced certain things. We gather all that report so we can put our risk assessment together. And then we're currently moving into the testing phase of internal controls and the substantive test work. And of course, during the completion of the audit, we do have to update our risk assessment. What that means is during an audit, we might pull some transactions and things and find something we didn't expect. Not necessarily a bad thing, it just happens sometimes, and you do a little extra work. But in that process, you do have to reevaluate the risk. In other words, was our risk assessment on day 1 right or wrong? Do we need to adjust that? Sometimes you need to bring it down, which means you do more test work to get to your conclusion. So there is a updating of that risk assessment, a process that occurs right before we finish. Then we finish the financials, we issue the opinion, we get that representation letter I mentioned, we come back and make a presentation to you of the results, and of course to brief the entire audit process. From a risk assessment perspective, here are the areas that we've identified so far, which I think most people would be familiar with these. But of course, the significant audit areas are your valuation and existence of your student loan balances, the valuation of debt, and of course, compliance with the debt covenants that are in existence. Looking at the accuracy and the existence of the appropriations and the grant revenue coming in and going out. And of course, the going out piece is looking at the financial assistance expenses being paid out. From a significant estimate, I've already mentioned the allowance for student loans. We spend quite a bit of time looking at that to make sure it lines up with industry standards. We do have to look at commitments and contingencies. We visit with Bill, we visit with outside attorneys if they've been hired, just to get an idea if there's any possible commitments there that we need to disclose or accrue for. And of course, Chris and his team do spend quite a bit of time looking at the 4 systems listed there, HELMS, MIP, CRS, and BMS. The scope slide just gives you a perspective of it is a 24 audit. We do follow GAAP and government auditing standards. Since you have federal funds, we also have to put the government auditing standards paragraph in the opinion. The auditing standards are primarily in the AICPA. There would be possibly a management letter, as I mentioned, if we had control issues, that would be a second deliverable we would give you in July. And the SADS 114 communication is 2 parts, one today and one in July. We are required to discuss a little bit about materiality, kind of give you a perspective of how that's set and what it means in an audit. It is an exercise of professional judgment. KPMG does have if you will, a number crunching model that we go through. But then we have latitudes on how to move that, and we actually have 5 different numbers when we crunch it. So it's not just some magic number that comes out. I like to think of the top numbers that do not pass go number. And then there's other ones in between that help us decide whether we can pass on something or whether we need to reclass or what we need to do. But we have math exercises we go through, and that drives our nature, time, and extent of our audit. Obviously, the lower the materiality, then it's the more work we have to do. And we can have different materialities for different areas of the audit as well, based on the risk assessment. So when we're setting materiality, we look at the nature and the size of the accounts. So for instance, just because it's a small account doesn't mean it's out of scope, because the question is, should it be bigger? So then sometimes we might bring that account into scope and have a lower materiality just because. And we do have to exercise professional judgment. So what that means is there are certain accounts we have to audit every year: cash, loans, debt. I mean, you can name them off. But then there are other accounts that we rotate in and out, because you always want to maintain an idea of professional skepticism. If somebody wanted to hide something and you looked at the same exact thing every year, it would be really easy to do. So that professional skepticism allows us to alter that approach. As far as the deliverables and timeline, we're kind of in that January-April phase on the right there, which I mentioned, the planning part, the risk assessment, the IT work. April to June is where we'll finish up a lot of the work that we've already talked about, and of course come back to the AOC in July and present the results. Here's the slide of the questions that we are required to ask the committee for and just kind of solicit some input into the audit process. I'll kind of walk through these and kind of give you a perspective from last year just to make sure if you want to continue that or if you want to change something. But the first question is about, is the AOC committee chair the appropriate person to communicate audit matters to? What that means is if the commissioner or Lynn and I come up with something that we believe shouldn't wait until July to discuss, we like to have a protocol up front of how to get that information to the committee. Historically, we would have start with the chair, and then the chair would decide whether to share or call a special meeting or what we needed to do. Is that still the appropriate avenue for us to pursue if needed? Do you want us
I
to?
would say
okay.
yes.
Okay.
Say yes, David.
Ms. Warren, when you and have you participated in audits of other state agencies?
I have.
And who is the person normally that does this?
The audit committee chair.
Audit committee chair.
Yes, sir.
And it is a question, something else that I've been thinking about bringing up. But do a lot of these agencies actually have a separate audit committee?
Half and half. That would be my best guess. A lot of them are subsets of the board, like yours are. Some of them, actually, the audit committee is responsibility of the full board. So it's probably 50-50 if they have a separate audit committee.
And do you have an opinion on that as far as what's more effective?
You know, I've actually seen it work both ways, to be honest. It depends upon just the dedication of the time. The way it doesn't work is if it's a full board and you only have 3 hours and that's all you got and you're starting to slam everything in there, that's not effective. In that situation, a committee is much more effective.
It's something I've been thinking of bringing up is whether we should have a separate audit committee. But
it's pretty much what one of AOC's responsibilities.
But it's one of the responsibilities as opposed to the responsibility.
Right.
It's something maybe we should discuss. But back to your question. So you think the committee chair is the appropriate? You're asking us, but what about the chair of the whole? As opposed to the committee chair?
It can be done that way. Historically, y'all have just asked us to go to the committee chair, and then the committee chair would make the decision to bring in the chair or not. That's why I'm asking if you want to continue that process, or if you'd like to change that, or if you want us to contact both of them.
My feeling is that it seems to have been working, and I think with David in that position, I feel very confident that he would make a good decision as it needed to go bring in Harold or however.
I'm okay with keeping it the way it is. If a matter came up that I thought should be discussed with the board chair and probably the vice chair, that's sort of how some of these decisions are made, where the three of us are polled on those matters. I would certainly be willing to share that with them, and then they could determine if the entire board needed to be involved or not. That what you were thinking, John?
Sure.
She's asking the question, so
Right.
you're getting what the response you want?
That's fine. I just need to know a plan of action. I mean, we haven't had to execute this in several years, but in the event that Linda, the commissioner, and I did, we'd like to know who it is we're supposed to call so we don't have to guess.
I would think that if it was something you felt that you needed to call this chairman about, the chairman of the committee, that it's probably something you need to tell.
And we've already had a
Chairman Hall
telephone
about.
call,
Have?
an interview, and we've actually had a couple back and forth. And Susan's agreed that if she sees something that causes her any concern, she's not going to wait till the end, that I'm going to hear about that immediately.
And practically, you're probably going to call Chairman Hall.
If it rises to that level, if it's something where I say, well, we need more information, get back to me, then I may delay until I get something more definitive.
What may I suggest then, just because it seems we have different opinions, is that if we need to contact somebody, we'll just call both David and Harold. Would that work? Is that fine? Okay. All right, we will do that. Question 2 is just to get a perspective on allocations of responsibility between management and the audit committee, or agency operation committee, sorry. The idea there is if you've given more authority to management or taken some away, we see that as a risk factor. So we just wanted to make sure there wasn't any significant policy changes in your directive to your management team.
I don't know of any. I'm looking at the chair, vice chair, anybody else? No? Staff?
As you're aware, we've had some reorganization, but
Sir?
I don't think there's been any significant authority shift.
Not to my knowledge.
Right.
3 is, from your perspective, any changes? I mean, obviously, we're going through the session, so I'll clarify that one up front. There's always possible changes coming out of the session, but outside of the possible changes from the session, anything that you've had to deliberate as far as direction related to objectives and strategy of the coordinating board?
Well, obviously, we're implementing what was passed in the last session, so that's coming online. And then going forward, we have a new 15-year strategic plan that we have an outside committee of experts that's working on. I don't think we're going to receive that until next spring, is when I thought we were planning on receiving the final.
In July.
It is going to be in July? Okay. So will we be deliberating and possibly adopting at that time?
You will be deliberating at the June CAP meeting and then adopting in July.
Okay. So that's something going forward. It's not something going backwards.
I appreciate the insight, though, because we usually finish our audit about that time, so we'll keep our eye on that. 4 is, from your particular perspective, is there anything that in your personal minds that warrants particular attention during the audit? I mean, you saw our risk assessment slide, or the significant areas where we focus, but anything in your minds that's not covered on that slide that we would like to discuss today?
You and I had discussed one particular area of concern, but is there anything else other members have?
That area of concern.
It had to do with the funding some of the beyond time loans in the past, and I think we're okay. But I've asked them to keep that in mind as
Yes,
that area.
He did. It has to do with the beyond time reports that Mark and I believe the State Auditor's Office did. He just wanted some background on that and to see if those things have been implemented. So I'm working with Mark's group to follow up on that.
So, Ms. Warren, you're asking us these questions in an open meeting, so you're getting our responses. And of course, one of the things we feel like they're possibly things we don't know about. But have you already asked these questions of management?
I have. We ask management before we come to get their perspective. And we do that in a group setting, and then we also do that in one-on-one settings. So we meet with all the executive team and most of the middle-level management members as well, and ask similar questions, and actually expand it. It's usually an hour conversation with them to get their perspective. So that's how we kind of gather where we think the risks are. We go back and liberate ourselves internally with our team and our professional practice people to make sure we understand the industry issues. And so we bring all that together to come up with where we believe the risks are in our audit process. But we do also like to make sure that there isn't something on your minds that we have missed in that thought process.
And John, I think you brought up a good point, and I think I'll make it for Susan. If there's any member of this committee or with this board that feels they need to talk directly with the auditor, she would be available to you to talk directly and confidentially.
Right.
So, I mean, I would invite anyone that feels like they need to talk to the auditor for whatever reason to do that. I would probably like to also know your concern as a chair of the committee. just so I'm in the loop?
Okay.
Absolutely. Usually at the end of the presentation, I offer that. So you're more than welcome to reach out to me at any point in time with any question. Doesn't even have to be a risk question.
But and I don't want to dwell on this, but of course this is a public record here.
Yes, it is.
But when you're dealing with management, you're just doing it verbally. You're not asking for responses in writing on these types of questions.
Not on the planning questions, no, but we do, when we do our risk assessment, we do go corroborate. So for instance, if you tell me you have a new policy that says signing authority has changed and these are the people who have signing authority, I go to the official policy, we get a copy of it, we make sure that's the case. And then we're pulling our samples, we make sure you're following that. So we can't audit in a closet, if you will, and just conversation alone is not enough, but it's a place to start. So we do gather the information and then go out and validate it.
Well, I'm just thinking like a question like any matters relevant to the audit, including but not limited to violations or possible violations of laws or regulations. Seems to me that if you're asking that kind of question, you'd want a response in writing.
Well, and we do on that one. That'll come from Bill. He is required to give us a legal letter at the end of the engagement to address that on behalf of the team.
Thank
you. Absolutely.
And he has to sign that.
Yes, he does. So 5, just significant communicators with regulators you've had to deal with. We'll just leave the, oh, I'm sorry.
Could I do?
Yes, absolutely.
Do you mind?
No, go ahead.
We also have, I think may help answer your question, there's a management representation letter
Yes,
that is
mentioned.
signed at the end of the engagement. And it has a litany of questions, and we can show you, Ms. Warren can, from the last audit, what it looks like. And that has similar questions and several more. And that letter is signed. And so that may answer your question. Instead of this up front, there is one that's provided, and it's actually provided with the audit, I think.
It is. It's a part of the deck that we mentioned we'd give to you in July, the representation
Thank
letter.
you,
And I mentioned
Ms.
that
Martin.
the 3 biggest pieces were their control, fraud, and uncorrected misstatements are things they have to attest
And
to.
that's number 7 on your 4th slide.
Yes, it is. It's number 7 on slide 4.
Okay, please proceed.
Okay, 5 is significant communicators with regulators. What we're looking for there is you had to make any decisions with regard to, more than likely for you, it would be the IRS, but any type of thing that's come before you that you've had to deliberate on related to outside regulators. I will tell you, Bill has told me no. If that helps.
I'm looking and I'm saying I don't think we're aware of it.
Okay, fair enough. 6 is a perspective of the committee on controls. You can see there, but from your looking at the financial reports and just being involved in conversations with management and updates, I know you're looking at upgrading your IT systems, things like that. Any particular concerns you have over internal controls at the coordinating board? Basically, controls that are not working.
Members, any concerns? I don't see any.
7, as Mr. Steen pointed out, is the possible violations of law. Bill will attest to that. Currently, during our planning process, he told us none, but he will provide us a letter at the end of the engagement as well. And then 8 is just a perspective of, it's kind of meant to be kind of just a brainstorming question, but developments in law obviously will come when the session passes, but so I'll leave that one off. But accounting standards I've mentioned to you, GASB 65, which is really not a material change, so that probably hasn't been something that's been on your radar. But corporate governance would be one that I would ask if you've had to make any changes in corporate governance that we would need to know about.
What does the B and the 6.5 represent in GASB 65?
Board is the B, and 65 is just the number, so they're consecutive.
Okay.
So there's 1 all the way up to 65 standards that we have to comply with from reporting. FASB, which is the SEC side of the world, they're up to like 158.
And counting.
And counting, yes. So those are the questions that the standards do ask us to ask you each year. And like I said, we kind of went through that. We do ask them of management. So those are the end of our prepared remarks. If anybody has other questions for us about audit process approach, just concerns in general.
Now, the only thing I might ask staff is to make your contact information, email, and office number available to every member of the committee with the invite that if they have anything to share, that they would do so directly with you.
Absolutely. You can do that.
Ms. Warren, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
How long has KPMG audited the coordinating board?
This is year 9.
9 years?
Yes, sir.
And you're the audit partner. How
I
long
am.
have you been the audit partner on it?
Those 9 years.
For 9 years. And what is when you look at the client service team, that was your second slide, you got an engagement quality control reviewing partner, Travis Hunter. He's not connected to everybody else, like, you've got the lines.
He's not. He's independent of the team. He is assigned to the team.
And tell me about him and what he
Absolutely.
does. Okay.
He is a government partner in our Dallas office. So he and I basically, as well as Rebecca, we do government 365 days a year. That's what we do. And the way it works is we have just think of the Texas as our business unit. So we have a business unit partner that's considered our risk partner, and it's a senior partner in the firm. And so for every client, he goes and finds a second partner, an engagement quality partner, and that person is assigned by him. So I don't get to pick that person. It's an independent pick by somebody who has the same level of expertise that needs to serve the client. It's one of KPMG's control processes for making sure we're managing our risk, and basically I'm doing my job. So he oversees us. Like every time we make a planning decision, like what was our materiality numbers, I sent those to Travis. He and I talked about it. He had some input. We changed some numbers. He signed off. When we finished our risk assessment a couple weeks ago, the same process again. We talked to him, what we're going to do with student loans, what we're going to do with this, how we're going to test the allowance. He listened. He had some input. He signed off. So as we keep going through the process, he's involved at a high level looking in without looking at the details to make sure that he has that 30,000 look thought process. When we get to the end, he does the same thing with the financial statements. So your management team prepares those, give them to Rebecca and I. We tie them out to supporting documents. I look at them for support and also content. Do they have all the standard disclosures in them? We hand them to Travis, and he does a second look doing the same thing. So he's meant to be the quality control. That's why we have that word in there of just kind of that second look to make sure there's not something we have misunderstood or not completely disclosed in the financial statements.
In the 9 years that you've done it, you've been the audit partner. Have you had a different engagement quality control review?
Actually, he's number 3, yes.
He's number 3?
Yes. There was Cynthia Reinhardt, and then she retired. Then there was Dee Niles, and she retired, and now there's Travis Hunter. They're usually more senior than we are, so they're usually a senior partner over the top of us.
And just one more question. I know there are advantages and disadvantages, but could you reflect on that of someone like yourself being the audit partner for 9 years?
Yes. Every firm has a different thought process. I will tell you KPMG's. We allow the audit partner to serve for 10 to 11 years. So I will have to roll off in a couple of years. The idea is that it is possible for us to get too close and to not ask the right questions every year. And so we manage that by putting that quality control partner in there and changing those out over that 9 to 10 year span, and then asking myself to step off for a 2-year cooling off period and then come back. So that's our kind of thought process on how to manage risk, but also by maintaining client service. Because by doing that, you still maintain the KPMG resources out of our national practice. You maintain our qualifications that we invest in the government practice. KPMG has a whole group of, there's 1,500 of us, that's all we do is government work. And so you still are able to hold those quals, hold that resources. It's a phone call away from me or whoever's taking my place. And then also the local team, Chris and Rebecca and all those people under them, when you rotate partners, you want to keep those people because that way you don't lose that knowledge. There was a couple of surveys done a few years ago by the SEC and the PCAOB, and they found that most audit failures happen within the first year of a new audit firm. So there is a lot of comfort, if you will, in managing risk by changing 1 or 2 people out at a time but not moving your entire team. So that's the way we view that process.
KPMG has an excellent reputation, and
Thank you.
I just want to tell you, you've given an outstanding presentation today.
I appreciate it very much.
Ambassador?
So who was the audit partner last year?
I was the audit partner last
For
year.
9 years.
I have been, this is my 9th year.
So is there a research out there to allow this model for 9 years or 11 years, a partner dealing with the same agency?
They're actually...
Let me give you some background.
I'm sorry, the 10-year rotation is actually a KPMG policy. There is actually no standard other than the SEC standard that requires a partner to rotate every 5 years. So KPMG is one of the only firms that actually requires non-SEC partners to rotate for the very reason I just explained, because we believe it's necessary to manage risk.
So at the State Department, they send the ambassadors out for 3 years. Because after 3 years, they feel that either they become contaminated enough,
Okay.
or there is an affinity that there is a relationship that starts. So they pull the ambassadors back in 3 years, because after 3 years they feel that the person who is representing the country to the other side becomes, they create this affinity between the other parties, and they start talking their language.
Sure.
Or their concern. They have more empathy. So they pull them back and send a new ambassador. And that's the model. They said they've done enough research for 3 years. How do we continue for 9 years?
It's the part of it is the quality control partner. I've had 3 in 9 years. So if you will, I've had someone looking over my shoulder now for 3 years and then switching 3 years and 3 years. I've also had 3 managers on this engagement. We also rotate our managers. I've had 2 IT managers on this engagement. I rotate IT managers. So we are required to rotate our team internally to where it's not the same team for 9 years. That's just the way we manage that risk. And there is no magic number. I can just tell you our policy is 10 to 11. And the reason why we give that 10 to 11 is that we don't want to draw a hard line in the sand in year 10. Like if you're in the middle of if a client's in the middle of a big ERP implementation, it is not wise to take your audit partner off in year 10. That's a huge risk to both sides. And so that's why we give the 10 to 11 leadway on that, is there's a client critical situation where the knowledge needs to stay. But that is a KPMG policy. You're not going to find that in most firms.
Ambassador, maybe it's like this. If you're an ambassador, you're there for 36 months. But if you're an auditor, you're only here 4 months, 9 years in a row. That's 36 months, too.
Maybe that's the model. Very good. Thank you. I like the analogy.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, seeing no more questions on that item, we'll move on to the State of Texas federal portion of the statewide single audit report for the fiscal year ended August 31, 2014, report number 15-313, issued March 2015 by State Auditor's Office. Susan Warren will again lead the discussion on this item for the committee.
Yes, and it is actually in your book behind the tab. I do not have a slide deck. I'll just walk through the actual findings that have been put in here for you. So if you would like to look at those, that's what I'll be referencing. This is in regard to the August 2014 statewide single audit, which is where Mr. Keel's office has hired KPMG to assist him in working on the audit of federal funds. And so you'll see here that the coordinating board had 2 findings. The first one is reference 2014-022, and it had to do with the federal loan program, the FELP program. I'll briefly tell you what these paragraphs say, but the first paragraph is what we call individual record review. The government requires that you maintain all the loan documents, the master promissory note, all the disbursement records, all that type of stuff that supports every disbursement. You're also required by paragraph 2 to do enrollment reporting where you work with the schools. So like if somebody withdraws or somebody graduates early, or something like that, then they're required to tell the coordinating board so you can start that payment process that you were talking about earlier with Ken. And then in those processes, the third paragraph tells you that as you make adjustments to a student's status, whether it's grace, repayment, deferment, whatever that is, you also have to change the way you're billing the federal government for interest. So those 3 things are what we were required to test in this area where we found an exception. And so the exception starts in the 4th paragraph where it talks about the timing list in which you had to make these updates. And the paragraph that says during fiscal year 2014 is really the meat of what the issue was. There was these reports that come in from Clearinghouse are called Clearinghouse reports. And during 2014, the agency's process was to have multiple account representatives working them. So these reports come in twice a week, 3 times a week, and they some of them can be 20 pages, they can be 100 pages, and they were just basically split up among a variety of people, and they were worked by different people. The challenge is there wasn't a completeness control to pull it back together. And so as part of that process, there was 8 reports that did not get worked timely. We worked with management to qualify that it only involved 220 loans, which is a very, very small number. And you can see there that it was only $218,000 of principal, which compared to your portfolio is a very, very small number. Unfortunately, the government has a $10,000 threshold where we have to write something up. So their threshold is very small also. So that's why this got made into a finding. A paragraph below talks about a particular student that actually was one of these that didn't get updated timely. They actually withdrew from school before They were supposed to, and so what should have happened is they should have gone into basically repayment status sooner. That didn't occur, but you can see that by the time you read the rest of that paragraph, it didn't matter because the student loan was paid in full, and so there was no loss on the loan. And then the last paragraph tells you that there was a second borrower that did get updated, but just not timely. The government also requires us to test timeliness. So the recommendation was that management try to put together a review control to centralize this process and make sure completeness was addressed. You can see there in the response that they did that in November. And when we come back to do the 15 statewide audit under Mr. Keel's direction, we will validate that that has been corrected. We have not at this point in time. Questions on finding that first finding?
In terms of validation, you're saying you'll wait till when to do that?
The next audit. So the next audit is actually in the planning processes right now. We signed our contract with Mr. Keel in March. We've been doing planning, and we will more than likely come here in July. Is usually when we come here to do that audit.
And so you'll do it in July?
Yes, sir.
The validation? All right,
Yes,
thank
we
you.
will. The second finding, finding 23, is what I call a carryover finding. You'll notice there it does say prior year audit issue. We did talk about this one last year. It has to do with the vocational education program. We had the computer system known as EDC. We had some access issues, basically someone who had access to something they weren't supposed to. But it actually got corrected on March 11, 2014. We have validated that. That's why I can say that in this statement. But because it was there for part of the fiscal 14 year, we are required to report that to the government. But at the same time, we can tell them it's already been fixed. So this finding has been resolved. Those are the only two findings that were in the report. It was overall a very clean audit for the coordinating board. Any questions I could further address?
On that second one, it says one developer had knowledge of the passwords. What is a developer? I don't understand the use of that term.
A developer is somebody who actually can change the code in the system.
Okay.
They're like a programmer.
Okay. And they're only supposed to have access to their own password.
They're supposed to have access to limited areas, so they basically can't go in and just change code randomly. And this was an administrative access, kind of like think of a DBA that has a lot more access than like a super user or something like that. But if you take a super user access combined with somebody who has knowledge of how to change code, that's a potentially dangerous combination. And so that's one of the standards things that we go look for is to make sure that developers or programmers don't have that excessive access.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your time today.
Appreciate yours. The next item is an update on the Texas State Auditor's Office final report and audit report on financial management processes at the Higher Education Coordinating Board. Michael Bem, the project manager, will present this item. If you'll just push your button there on your microphone. All right. Floor is yours, sir.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
My name is Michael Bame. I'm with the State Auditor's Office. I was the project manager for this audit, and I'm here with John Young, who is the audit manager for the project. I'm here today to just summarize the results of the audit of the financial management processes at the Higher Education Coordinating Board. Throughout the presentation, I'll just refer to the Coordinating Board as the agency. Our objectives were to determine whether the Higher Education Coordinating Board, the agency's financial management processes, ensure that the agency budgets and spends funds as required by the General Appropriations Act, applicable statutes, agency rules, policies, and procedures, and that the agency's financial information is reliable, accurate, and consistent. The scope of the audit was fiscal years 13 and 14, so from September 1, 2012 through August 31st, 2014. I'm going to go through the issues that we have found pretty much in the order that they are covered in the report. Our overall conclusion was that the agency has financial management processes to help ensure that it complies with applicable statutes, rules, and agency policies for creating its annual trusteed budget, making revisions to that budget, and dispersing funds to higher education institutions. In addition, the agency has implemented processes to help ensure that its financial data is reliable, accurate, and consistent. However, the agency did not have written procedures for certain financial management processes. For the issues discussed in Chapter 1, we looked at the agency's budget preparation process, including transfers for administrative costs and budget revisions. And we also looked at some follow-up work on the findings reported in the Beyond Time internal audit done. We found the following: that the agency did comply with the General Appropriations Act when it prepared its trustee budget for fiscal years 2014 and 2015, and complied with statutory limitations when making transfers from the trustee budget for administrative costs. The agency lacks written policies and procedures for budget preparation and review process. The agency did not consistently follow its policies to obtain all required approvals when it made budget revisions. However, the budget revision transfers that we tested made during fiscal years 2013 and 14 were within the 20% limit established by the Article 9 of the General Appropriations Act. The agency addressed weaknesses in its controls over the Beyond Time loan program, including making changes to its loan management system, separating the duties of the Assistant Commissioner of the Business and Support Services into two different positions, and by strengthening its budget revision policy. For issues discussed in Chapter 2, we looked at the agency's process for allocating and dispersing funds to higher education institutions, performing accounting transactions, and negotiating rules. We found the following: that the agency dispersed funds to community colleges in compliance with the General Appropriations Act and dispersed institutional grants to eligible higher education institutions. The agency could not provide written procedures for 3 of the 6 programs tested, and the written procedures for the other 3 programs tested should be strengthened to include a more comprehensive description of program processes. We could not recalculate some of the financial aid allocations using the methodology the agency described, and the agency did not consistently maintain support for the allocation calculations. The division did not have written policies and procedures for its student loan programs. The agency reviewed and approved all financial aid grant and loan disbursements tested before the disbursement of those funds. The agency complied with the Texas Administrative Code by having a signed promissory note for each student loan recipient tested. We tested adjusting entries and expenditure transfers, and the agency reviewed and approved all the transactions tested in accordance with agency policy. However, they did not consistently comply with the policy to segregate duties when making adjustments to the Uniform Statewide Accounting System or the agency's internal accounting system. The agency completed the negotiated rulemaking process for its financial aid programs in compliance with the Texas Administrative Code and the Texas Government Code. For issues discussed in Chapter 3, we looked at the controls related to the data in the agency's payment processing system, loan management system, and internal accounting system. And we found the following. The agency protected access to the information technology systems that we tested through password rules and a quarterly review of user access. We did not identify any inappropriate access. In addition, all of the hard copy documentation that we tested matched the information in the information systems. We also tested 2 automated monthly financial reports, and we did identify an error in the monthly report that compared year-to-date expenditures to the agency's budget for August 2014. Although all of the budget information was accurate, the information that was related to the Beyond Time loan program and the Texas Armed Services Scholarship Program was significantly underreported in August 2014 report. Kind of concludes the summary of the report. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions that you might have.
On that last item, what constitutes significantly?
By millions of dollars. In the report, let's see, on page 13, for the Beyond Time loan program, the expenditures were reported at $1.8 million instead of about $43 million. And for the Texas Armed Services, the report reported expenditures of $234,000 instead of approximately $3 million.
Yeah, I would think that was significant.
Yes.
Where would the threshold in your mind as an auditor be for the use of the word significant? More than 10%?
A good question. I would say 10% is a good threshold.
Any other questions for the auditor?
Mr. Boehm, so you pointed out these deficiencies, or maybe that's not the right word, and you've already gotten management's response?
Yes. Yes, management did agree with the recommendations that we made in the report and have, I guess, begun implementing.
And then what kind of follow-up do you all do to make sure that that management does follow through on it?
Follow-up is usually a part of our risk assessment process where when we're kind of developing our audit plan, we look at, how long it has been since we have been to agencies. That's one of the things that we look at. And then if we were to conduct another audit, then we would come and look at those follow-ups or do follow-up on that work. And I know in the past we have also done audits that are basically just follow-up work at agencies that we have done audit work at. So I don't have a definitive answer of when we would come and do follow-up, but when we were to come back to the agency, we would most likely look at that follow-up.
Well, the people in our position on the board, we want to make sure that your recommendations are that they're followed through on, and I think maybe the best way to do that is if you all came back in and made sure that these things were accomplished. But are you saying you have to wait till you come back?
There's not a set schedule for us to come back and follow up. The agency is responsible to report to us on a regular basis that things have been, or whether it's been implemented or where they are in the process of implementing those.
And what would you say to us as board members? What should we be doing to make sure this happens?
Internal audit could also perform follow-up on that.
Harold? Mark, could you come up?
I do think we had most of the issues I was aware of, except for the significantly underreporting.
Right.
Internal audits.
And Ms. Shepard, what I'm trying to get at is that we hear these reports. We're volunteers. We go back and forth. I just want to make sure someone is making sure all these things are done. Yeah.
Mark, you were involved in this to some extent, probably to a large extent. From the agency standpoint, you are looking at these items to see what they are when the changes that need to be made are implemented. Is that correct?
It is. It's kind of a yes and no answer is how I put it. The agency, the State Auditor's Office, has a process where they track every recommendation that's published in their reports. So every year they send to this agency, to me, and then I farm out to all of the division heads, that, if you will, the owners of the issues, these previously reported findings, and then there's some narrative that goes with the actions that have been taken, and then there's a categorization, either fully implemented, partially implemented, and if it's partially implemented, then there's a target date for full implementation that is required by the State Auditor's Office. So it's a fairly rigorous reporting system that we then feed into this State Auditor's Office database, and they carry the issues year after year until the agency classifies them as fully implemented. So that is the extent of my involvement. Do I actually go out and schedule a separate follow-up audit to myself, validate every one of those findings? Not to this point. I have not. Could I? Yes, I can. I can reserve, hours in order to follow up on State Auditor's Office outstanding issues. Certainly.
Okay, and Linda, from a management standpoint, What are we doing to address these things?
Both David and I have been meeting with our staffs to ensure that the written policies are done, and I believe that David and his staff have completed those. So what we're doing agency-wide is ensuring that these written policies are available physically in a central office in each of our areas, and that we update them regularly. So I think that's the biggest piece. I'd like to bring up Ken to address the other issues, such as the underreporting and the beyond time and the task.
Oh, Mr. Pohl, could you stay up here? Oh, yeah, that's fine.
On the be on time and the task, the item there was reporting. It wasn't the actual programs themselves. It wasn't actually in the financial systems, and I'll explain what I mean by that. As noted in the actual audit report, we report this on a monthly basis, this information. All the prior reports prior to that year-end report were correct as noted in the audit report. At year-end, well, within the report, those two programs are actually loan programs. They're not expenditure programs from an accounting standpoint. So all of our programs, Texas grants, et cetera, are expenditures. True expenditures from an accounting standpoint, they show up expenditures, and a financial reporting their expenditures. But a loan program or a loan is not an expenditure. Even though cash is dispersed out the door, it is actually a loan. It's a receivable. It's a balance sheet account, and does not hit your operating statement. And so from that standpoint, when we generated this report a couple years back, we noted that the Beyond Time account was really the impetus to it, was the balance was never really going. It looked like it was always underexpended. And then in researching that, we found out, oh yeah, it's an operating or non-operating item. What we did is we went to our accounting system, the state accounting system, USAS, and worked with IT and reporting and pulled a specific field in that USAS system, because our current accounting system won't give us that data from the standpoint that it is a loan, it's a receivable. But the state system's a little unique and records things a little bit differently. So for those two items, we were pulling from this USAS system, and every month it's correct, because the state accounting system actually records things as expenditures. And what we have to do at year end, because it records those as expenditures, is at year end for our financial statements, for the annual financial report that goes to the comptroller, and for our standalone financial report, which we just completed, that will be audited here by KPMG, we have to go into the USAS system before our close period for the comptroller and convert those expenditures to loans, to receivables, and we actually make an accounting adjustment. What happened at year end with that is that it was an expense. If you looked at 8/31, the report was great. If you look at September, it's fine. But my finance team is also working the close and the financial report. And between the time we did our review and the time a couple days later we went to print, that entry was made and zeroed out virtually the expenditures in USAS and converted them to receivables. So again, the systems are correct, but then when we finally printed the report, it goes back to that system and looks and says, the balance is significantly less than what it was because of that accounting entry that was.
You concur with that, Mr. Young and Mr. Bennett?
Absolutely. That's very accurate.
Okay.
What I wanted to get at, so you all have done an audit, you've made recommendations, and then Mr. Martin, you're the primary responsible person on all of these, right? And so you've agreed with the recommendations, right?
And in some cases, they were under my cognizance, came up with the recommendations. Yes, sir.
What was that?
Not the recommendations, I'm sorry, the management responses, and the ones under my cognizance, we came up with the management responses. But I agreed with the recommendations, absolutely.
Right. So I'm just concerned that we have, because you all have to go on and do other things, that we have somebody, and I guess, Mr. Pohl, you're the person that comes back to us as a board and says, yes, these things have been fully implemented. That's what we're looking for, somebody to assure us of that.
Sure. And, the timing is good because we're actually right now doing our risk assessment and developing our audit plan for next fiscal year, and we can reserve hours to go in and do some testing and validation of what's been implemented to address the state auditor's issues. So something separate and apart from and in addition to the self-reporting that the state auditor's office requires us to do. Yes.
So my question is, clearly management agreed with all three of the recommendations. Clearly Ken's office has been assigned point of contact on this. My question would be, from the state auditor's perspective, is management response, if fully implemented, going to be adequate to solve the issues that you identified?
I would say yes. And we reviewed management's responses to, get a feeling whether that will actually address the recommendation, and I feel that it would.
So what I would suggest, and I'll certainly listen to the rest of the committee, is that we would direct Ken to issue us a report of their progress in fully implementing and correcting these at the next AOC meeting, and that we would direct Mark to then follow up with some type of an audit that those are all corrected, because clearly the state auditor is not going to be back for a while, and I want to make sure that the corrections are going to solve the issue. So I think that this is a high enough level issue if the state auditor identify those three areas that we would want to hear from management. What have you done to fix the problem or to correct it, or all the things that Linda's talking about? Just send us a report that we can include in the AOC at the next meeting, and then at the appropriate time follow up with an audit on those areas.
Sure.
Is everyone else in agreement with asking for that?
And that would be consistent with what we had performed with the Be On Time audit, for Mark's internal audit of the Be On Time. We reported back to the AOC each quarter what the status was of that audit and the resolution of each one of those items until it's fully completed.
Yeah, I believe staff is going to address it, but I'm a trust but verify kind of guy.
Mr. Bim and Mr. Young, would that seem a reasonable thing for a state agency to do, to address the issues that are brought forward in your report?
That seems reasonable.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay.
And maybe I missed this. How often do we go through this with the state auditor?
Through an audit?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
It depends on, we have a risk assessment process that we go through every year to develop our audit plan. And so based on, the risks that are associated by or identified by our risk assessment team, they create, a list of audits that, that we would like to accomplish during that year. So
a list of agencies or a list of?
It could be agency specific or program specific.
Okay.
They're coming up with, specific audits that we need to do with objectives based on risks that they've identified.
It's not unlike what we do with the institutions. Mark has a risk profile that he establishes.
So when's the last time that y'all were at the coordinating board?
I believe we did an audit in, I think it's in one of the appendices, a couple of years ago. Bear with me here.
There's a couple different audits that are performed, and I can speak to a few that I know since I've been here and limited within 6 years. But a couple audits they'll perform. This one was called a financial management audit, or fiscal management audit. Other times they'll come and audit the benefit proportional requirement that we have, maybe specific to that type of item. We do have other types of audits, post-payment audits that may come from the comptroller, as well as various other items, including the outsourcing of the federal audit to KPMG that's outsourced through the state auditor's office. So it's not one, when you say when was the last time they're back, just for clarity, you may want to, is it that when was the last time they're back on this particular type of audit or any type of audit?
Both of those. I'd like to know both, was what I was just kind of getting a feel for, because I haven't seen you guys, and maybe it was when we first came on. Is it?
I know I've seen the state
right.
The state auditor report. I don't recall what it was about, but yeah.
I think in the report that we listed, the last audit that was similar, or I guess somehow related, was in November of 2009 that we were here. So there's not going to be a certain period of time. It just depends on.
And I think to Mr. Steen's point, that I like the direction that we're going here, because it's not like y'all are going to be back here to see, so internally, we need to make sure that we have followed through, and I like the suggestion that we've got. It seems to make sense to me. So thank you.
Mr. Boehm and Mr. Young, anything particularly troubling in what you found?
The main issues were just a lack of written policies and procedures, and that's very important, just because you want to have your processes written down so that if people who do the job leave the agency, you have something to fall back on, and also it standardizes, the process so everybody knows, what to expect and what to do. So that is important, and that was the main findings that we had, was that there weren't, written policies and procedures. Other than that, there were a lot of good things that we identified in the report.
Well, sounds like that. In other words, we don't want to diminish the importance of what you found, but it doesn't sound like you found anything troubling. Correct?
This was a fairly good news report. I mean, one of our big areas was a budget process, and that was done appropriately in compliance with Preparations Act. The IT systems looked good. There were good controls over application, general controls. So I would say, there's a few bumps in there, but on balance, I'd say it's a positive report.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Young.
Members, any other questions? Gentlemen, thank you for your report. Thank you. So the next item is the last item under the audit section, is an update on internal audit reports and activities. Mark Peel, the Director of Internal Audit and Compliance, will present this update, and again, this does not require any action.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. Item 6D is informational item to, as we do at every meeting, to bring you up to date on internal audit reports and activities. In this case, since our last update in January, since that time, we have 4 internal audit projects that were completed, and those 4 projects are in your materials. One was we were just discussing follow-up work. In this case, it was a follow-up of our own work over a previous audit of the agency's telecommuting work program. And so that was a positive result on that. All 3 prior recommendations were fully addressed by management. And then we have 3 other reports in your materials that are conclusions of investigations. As you may know, we routinely receive complaints from various sources. Some of them are referrals from the State Auditor's Office, whom you just heard from. Others are sometimes come in through our agencies, just people calling the agency and vocalizing a concern. And depending on the nature of that concern, we may or may not be asked to take a look at it. So the 3 complaints that are in your materials, the conclusion of those, for all 3, we really weren't able to substantiate the complainant's allegations. The first one was related to Kilgore College, and that was an allegation pertaining to inaccurate financial information being submitted to the coordinating board. And so we took a look into that area and really were not able to satisfy ourselves that the information that was being submitted, the information that was being questioned, was inaccurate. So we closed that particular complaint. The second complaint in your materials came from a former student of Texas Southern University relating to some loan funds that he believed to be inappropriately attributed to his account by the institution. And we actually, in some cases, depending on the institution and the availability of their resources, like at Texas Southern, they have an internal audit shop that reports to their board, so they have the independence and objectivity. So oftentimes we will reach out and work or partner with those institutions, as we did in this case. So they took a look into this area and reported back to us. We had some discussions. Ultimately, really dismissing the substance of the complaint. You could essentially categorize it as a misunderstanding of the loan situation for that particular student. The third report that you have, that's a complaint report, pertained to UTSA, and that was an allegation by a student that never attended that institution, that they had aid that was showing up on their financial aid transcript as having been from an unknown school, and so they were questioning how did UTSA enter, or how did this information essentially get onto their transcript. It looks like the student applied for that institution and then did not attend, and then in between those two time periods, they received a small amount of federal aid. The institution apparently made a data entry error in entering the aid into an unknown school category. So once we worked with UTSA, brought the error to their attention, they were able to work with the federal government to get the system designation for that aid changed from from unknown school to UTSA, and the student that made the complaint was satisfied with that particular action. So it really kind of depends on the nature of the complaint as to the nature of our procedures, but these are brought before you just to show that we do take them seriously, and we do perform due diligence and bring them the conclusion back before the committee. Are there any questions about any of those reports? And then I can provide a couple of final comments. I just wanted to give the committee and the board a heads up. We are working on our audit plan for next fiscal year, and so we solicit input from all of our stakeholders, including each of you in your governance capacity as a board member. And so in a number of days, you will be receiving an email that I send out each year to each of you individually, just inviting any comments or perspective that you would like to share in terms of audits or risks or things that you may have on your mind that we could factor into the development of our audit plan for next fiscal year. That plan is based on 3 internal audit staff, myself and 2 staff members. If you will remember from the October meeting, we talked about the sufficiency of audit resources, and at that time, the commissioner was able to identify an additional position for our division, and so you will see next year's plan reflecting the number of hours that we're able to increase our coverage based on that. And with that, that's my update for internal audit. I'd be happy to answer any additional questions.
I don't see any, so we can move on to the next agenda item, which will be our last. It's compliance monitoring section of the agenda and an update on the compliance monitoring reports and activities. And again, Mark is going to lead this update.
Dr. Tasher, could I, just before we move away from that, I've been involved with other agencies where we develop a grid where there's the different areas you could possibly audit, and it would go back in time when you last audited them, and then
Sure.
also assign a number that do you do something similar?
Actually, I believe from October we had a document. I don't think it was included in the agenda materials, but I think I handed it out as part of that discussion, and it sort of shows, as you're describing, a listing of all the areas, and then it's kind of an above the line, below the line presentation, so you can see with this level of resources, these are the areas that we can cover.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Would you send me that again?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
The compliance monitoring update is informational only. We like to bring to each meeting the projects that have been completed, reports issued since the previous meeting, in this case January. We've completed 5 projects since our last AOC meeting. 3 were formula funding, data integrity reviews, and of those 3, one of the, and all the reports are in your materials, one of those projects had reportable conditions. That's Central Texas College District. And at that particular institution, the issues, when we go out and do our work, just as you heard KPMG's presentation and really the State Auditor's Office, any auditor is going to evaluate the integrity of the information systems so that we can go on then and perform the test of details, the test of compliance, and have some assurance that the information that we're looking at has not been altered or modified or changed, that there's appropriate information systems controls to enable an evaluation of the work. And so we're refining our process in order to get better at actually doing that. And you'll see from Central Texas College District that that there are some issues related to information security, the need for better information security, better defined program over information security, because the type of data that we test on these projects, formula funding data, which is student data, semester contact hours, enrollment information, all of that's coming from the institution's student information system, and we need to make sure that those systems have reliable control. So you see a management response in your materials where the institution indicates the actions that they're going to be taken to strengthen the controls. We will perform follow-up work at these institutions to go back out and validate that the actions that they have said that will be taken are in fact taken and implemented. So that's our 3 formula funding data integrity projects. We had 2 financial aid related projects. These were both in the area of the college access loan. And for both of those projects that are in your materials, there were no reportable conditions. And that is the conclusion of the compliance monitoring update.
Any questions? Members? Thank you, Mark. Any other items of business? Hearing none, will be adjourned. Thank you. I'm sorry, Janelle. I'd be happy to entertain a motion if you'd like to make one. I didn't hear any objections, so I figured it passed unanimously.